Everyone thought Minato's flying RAIJIN was just an incredible jutsu. They were wrong. It was a bloodline limit, hidden within the Namikaze family all along. When Naruto awakens it as a child, speed stops being an advantage and becomes a weapon. One flash, one strike, and the battlefield is already over. They called Minato the Yellow Flash. Naruto is about to become something even faster. The Flash Fire, Chapter 1. Need to know. Naruto prevents damaging his hands from friction burns by running chakra through them. By the time the Rookie 9 graduates, Naruto is already a Jounin, which is why he fails the Genin exam. It makes no sense to put an actual Jounin on a Genin team. Irika already knows of Naruto's status since he sometimes has to miss days at the academy to go on missions. The excuse is usually that he is just skipping. The only reason why Naruto is not an official Jounin before he graduates is that Sarutobi is trying to keep Naruto hidden from the village, hidden in the rock for as long as possible. Naruto's codename is Kitsune, but as he starts accepting missions and actually taking credit for them, he will begin being called the Flash Fire. Before graduation, Naruto has only been sent on missions inside the Land of Fire. He does know the Shadow Clone Jutsu since the Hokage felt that he should know it so that he has a clone jutsu, but he rarely uses it in a fight due to his speed, relying on it more for recon purposes. As for the Tri-Kunai that Minato used, it is more of a beacon to tell Minato where he needs to go when he activates his bloodline. 1. Joining the Slipstream. 5 years after Kyuubi attack, October 10th, Hidden Leaf Village. A festival was currently underway in the marketplace of the village hidden in the leaves. Unfortunately, not everyone was currently enjoying it. Halfway across the city, a mob was currently chasing a blonde 5-year-old, screaming out threats as the members of the mob began catching up to the child. Why are they doing this? What have I ever done to them? The blonde thought as he kept running. As the crowd got closer, a shinobi threw a kunai at the blonde Barley, missing the child as he stumbled on a piece of loose pavement. They're actually trying to kill me, the blonde thought with wide eyes. As he thought this, something unlocked inside of his body before he suddenly felt as if he could go much faster than he currently was. Not caring where the feeling came from, the blonde focused on it and shot away from the mean adults, leaving a dust trail to their shock. The blonde ran for a while before coming upon the main gate of the village and stopped running and began panting, ignoring the shocked looks of the guards at the gate from seeing someone so young running so fast. As he was hunched over with his hands on his knees, the boy thought, I don't know what just happened, but I'm glad it did. Right as he finished that thought, the blonde's eyes rolled upwards before he collapsed. As he fell, one of the guards rushed over and caught the boy. Turning to his partner, he said, I'm taking him to the Hokage. Getting a nod from the other, he put the blonde on his back and began roof-hopping to a tower in the distance. Naruto's mindscape. Naruto woke up to find himself in the middle of an intersection in a sewer. Looking around, he thought, great, they still caught me and dumped my body in a sewer when they were done. Now how do I get out of here? That was when Naruto noticed a sound. It wasn't a dripping sound like what you would expect in places like a sewer, although there was that. No, it sounded more like a whooshing sound. If Naruto had to describe it, he would say it sounded like some kind of a giant breathing. Naruto looked down the hall that the breathing sound seemed to come from and shrugged. Might as well go check it out. I've got nothing better to do down here, Naruto said to himself before he began walking down the corridor. A short time later, the hall opened into a huge room with bars at the end that formed a pair of truly massive doors. As he entered and began walking towards the door, a voice called out, stopping him in his tracks. So my jailer finally decides to come see me. Naruto shivered as he heard the voice. Don't ask him how, but he felt like the voice would scare the crap out of anyone who heard it. A large growling sound filled the chamber before the voice spoke again. Child, come closer. Naruto shook his head and said, no offense whoever you are, but I'm not quite sure I want to. There was a loud roar before what could only be described as large claws appeared between the bars, slamming on the ground about 10 feet in front of the terrified blonde who had fallen on his butt with a shout. More growling sounded again as the claws withdrew before Naruto heard, curse this seal. If it weren't for that damnable piece of paper, I would devour you. Hearing that he was safe, although not sure how a piece of paper could hold something that had claws that big at bay, the blonde stood up and called out, who are you? Dark chuckling was his answer before the blonde saw a shape take form in the darkness. Naruto's eyes widened as he saw 9 tails waving in the air. Falling back on his butt again, he started chanting, I'm dead. I'm dead. I'm dead. I'm so dead. The revealed fox roared again and said, "Shut up, you insect. You're not dead. So stop your useless blabbering." Naruto shook his head and said, "I've got to be dead. The fourth killed you. Foolish mortal. No mere mortal could ever kill me. The only thing that pitiful human could do was seal me inside, you pathetic brat. But mark my words, as soon as I can, I'm getting out of this rotten cage, and on my way out I'll devour you." Naruto's face turned from a look of fear to a look of confusion. "What do you mean sealed you inside me?" The fox began chuckling darkly and said, "Tell me, Kit, have you ever wondered why everybody in that god-forsaken village of yours hates you?" Naruto nodded before the fox continued. "That's because that mortal who you call the fourth sealed me inside you. You aren't dead. This is your mind." The blonde's eyes widened as he tried to process what he was hearing. Then he got angry as everything sunk into his mind as he remembered all the beatings he had received in his short life as well as all of the names he had been called. Standing back up, he yelled, "You mean to tell me you're the reason my life has been so bad? Why the hell did you even come here and attack us? Huh? Answer me." The QB roared again. The roar was so loud it actually sent the blonde flying for a few feet. "Do not presume to command me, you insect. I may be imprisoned here, but that does not make me your slave. And as for why I attacked your village, if you must know, I got bored so I went to have some fun. Now get out." A wave of red energy rushed out of the cage and slammed into the blonde, forcing him out of the room and out of his mind. Hokage Tower, Hokage's office. As Naruto came to, he heard two voices talking. I swear, Lord Hokage, he had been going jounin level speeds before he stopped. And then once he got to the gate, he just fell over out like a light. I see. While I admit that it is hard to believe, why don't we ask Naruto what happened? He seems to be waking up now. Naruto opened his eyes to find himself in a familiar office on a couch. As he sat up, the man that Naruto had begun to see as a grandfather came up to the couch as the gate guard from before hung back. Kneeling down in front of the blonde, the Hokage gave his grandfatherly smile and said, "You gave us a bit of a worry, Naruto. How do you feel?" Naruto groaned before saying, "Besides the fact that my legs feel like I've been running for days, I feel fine, old man." Said old man nodded and said, "Speaking of running, Naruto, Kotetsu here said that you had ran to the gate at pretty fast speeds. Do you mind telling me what happened?" Naruto shrugged and said, "I don't know. One moment I'm running for my life from another mob, the next a kunai nearly hits me and I felt like I could run faster than anyone in the village. I just focused on that feeling and the next thing I know I'm at the gates trying to catch my breath." Sarutobi raised an eyebrow and thought, did he unlock his bloodline? I thought that wasn't supposed to happen until he was 16. It must have been because of the kunai being thrown at him. The old man was brought out of his thoughts by a hesitant voice saying, "Old man." The Hokage looked at Naruto, who was looking at him like he was trying to figure out if he should keep speaking. "Yes, Naruto? Was there something else you need to tell me?" Naruto nodded slowly and said in an unsure voice, "Well, you see, after I got to the gate, I ended up passing out and woke up in some kind of a sewer. I ended up meeting the QB." Naruto frowned as Sarutobi and Kotetsu's eyes widened before continuing. "At least I think I did. That was one hell of a dream if I didn't. It said something about being sealed inside me and us being in my mind at the time." Sarutobi sighed as he felt a headache as big as the Hokage monument coming on. Rubbing the bridge of his nose, he said, "Kotetsu, you are dismissed. I don't believe I have to tell you to keep what you have heard in this office to yourself. The last thing we need right now is anyone else learning that Naruto has talked to the QB." The guard nodded and walked out of the office, closing the door on his way out. Sarutobi then looked back at Naruto and said, "Naruto, there's a lot we need to talk about. First off, I'm afraid that that wasn't a dream. Unfortunately, nothing we could do could kill the QB. It was a form of solid chakra. Therefore, the only thing the fourth could do was seal it inside of you, giving his life in exchange." Naruto was wide-eyed as Sarutobi continued, "I was hoping that you wouldn't find out about that until you were older, but I guess there's nothing I can do about that now. Either way, we have something else that is possibly even more important to discuss. You remember that feeling of being able to run so fast that you talked about?" Naruto nodded and Sarutobi took out his pipe and stuffed it with tobacco before using a small fire jutsu to ignite it, and took a deep draw to steady himself before saying, "That felling was your bloodline limit activating itself." Naruto's eyes widened as Sarutobi continued saying, "It wasn't supposed to activate until you were 16, but it seems that your near-death experience unlocked it early. I was going to tell you about your parents then, and to be completely honest with you, I still want to wait for a while before I do. But your father was adamant about me telling you when your bloodline activated. Naruto frowned and said, "Why did you want to wait? You told me that you couldn't find anything about them." Sarutobi sighed again and said, "Naruto, you have to understand that both of your parents had many enemies, and if any of them ever learned that you were their child, they would stop at nothing to harm you in order to get revenge. They might even kill you, so I'm going to have to ask you to tell absolutely no one what I'm about to tell you. Understand?" Naruto looked down and nodded. Sarutobi nodded as well and said, "The first thing I suppose I should tell you about is your bloodline. It doesn't actually have an official name, but your father called it the Slipstream." 7 years later, Hidden Leaf Village main gate. Kotetsu and his partner Izumo were lounging inside the gate guard's booth, with no one in sight when they heard a voice say, "Do you guys ever stay awake your whole shift? If I didn't know any better, I would say you two are being paid to sleep." The two looked up and saw a 12-year-old blonde in a regular shinobi outfit with a pack over his shoulder signing the check-in sheet. Kotetsu smirked and said, "Ah, you're just jealous that you don't have as easy a job as we do, Kitsune," said Shinobi, simply smirked and shook his head before saying whatever, before seeming to disappear like he was never there. Izumo shook his head and said, "No matter how many times I see him do that, it still weirds me out to see him just disappear like that." Kotetsu merely chuckled with a "yeah," before placing his head back on the booth's counter and went back to sleep. Naruto reappeared at the door of his apartment and pulled out a set of keys before finding the right one and placing it inside the door's lock. As he turned the key, he thought, "I'm so glad no one lives up here with me. No awkward questions to answer if I ever just appear in front of someone." Once the door was unlocked, Naruto walked in and closed the door before heading to his room and putting the pack into his closet after pulling a scroll out of one of the side pockets. Naruto then grabbed an orange jumpsuit and changed into it before hanging his previous outfit in the back of the closet. Untying his headband, he then opened a secret compartment and placed it in before shutting it. Closing the closet door, Naruto walked back out of his apartment and locked the door before disappearing again. Hokage Tower, Hokage's office. Sarutobi was currently doing every Kage's enemy. As he signed another form and reached for another from the large pile of paperwork on his desk, he said, "I take it your mission was a success." Naruto nodded from where he was standing in front of the desk and said, "Yes, sir. No problems eliminating the bandits. Overall, it was a smooth in and out operation. My report has the specifics on what was stolen and everything else." As Naruto spoke, he placed the scroll on the desk and Sarutobi nodded before lightly muttering about there being even more paperwork and that his successor must have used his bloodline limit to get done with it so easily. Naruto smiled when he heard this and said, "You know, old man, I think I figured out on the way back how he actually did it so fast. And it wasn't his bloodline either." Sarutobi's eyes widened and he said, "Really? How?" Naruto simply made a cross shape with his hands, and after a moment Sarutobi's eyes widened further, before he began banging his head on his desk saying, "Stupid, stupid, stupid." The door to the office opened and Sarutobi's secretary poked her head in and said, "Sir, is everything all right?" Naruto turned around as Sarutobi raised his head that now had a red mark on his forehead and said, "Yeah, Mrs. Reina's, everything's all right. The old man just realized something that he should have figured out a long time ago." Mrs. Reina's nodded, not questioning how Naruto had got in without her noticing having stopped trying to catch said blonde getting in past her years ago. Smiling, she closed the door again and went back to her desk. Hiruzen shook his head free of the cobwebs he had put into his mind and decided to get to other important matters. "So you believe that Mizuki will finally take the bait this year?" Naruto turned back around to look at his leader and nodded, saying, "He's getting pretty impatient, but he seems willing to wait until after graduation. He probably feels that since it will be 3 times this year that I'll be desperate enough not to ask too many questions. Like they say, third time's the charm. Tell you what though, if he doesn't go for it this time, I say just send him to Ibiki regardless. I don't think I could take another year in there. I can't tell you how many times I wanted to wipe that smug smirk off of the Uchiha's face during our spars." Sarutobi nodded and said, "I know it's been hard for you, Naruto, but look on the bright side. We do this right, and you most likely won't have to deal with young Sasuke or any of your other classmates for a long time." Naruto nodded again and said, "Yeah, I'm going to miss Hinata though. She was the only one who was actually nice to me. Tell you one thing though, I'll be glad when I no longer have to act like I'm head over heels in love with Haruno. That girl hits as hard as Lady Tsunade. I swear the two are distantly related or something. Well, see you later, old man. As Naruto was turning to exit the office the normal way now that the important stuff was talked about, Sarutobi said, "Actually, Naruto, I have another mission that I think you might enjoy doing for me." Naruto rose an eyebrow before catching the thrown scroll and unrolled it before smirking as he read what was written down. Looking back to his leader and nodding, he tossed the scroll back and said, "I'll get right on it. Take a look out your window at the monument in the morning when you hear the shouting start." Sarutobi nodded and said, "I'm looking forward to it." The next morning, Sarutobi heard, "Hey guys, look at this," turning around in his seat just in time to catch the Jinjutsu that was over the Hokage monument fall. The old man fell out of his seat in laughter as he saw what Naruto had done to get everyone's attention for his mission. The fourth's head had 2 fingers painted next to it in the victory sign, as well as its tongue sticking out, while the other Hokages were painted looking up as if they were shaking their heads in exasperation. Painted over the heads were the words, "The Hidden Leaf's #1 prankster strikes again." On the monument, Naruto gave himself a pat on the back before he heard, "Uzumaki." Naruto looked to the side and saw a team of 4 Umbu coming at him. He mock-paled before grinning like a madman and ran over to the edge of the monument before shooting off down the side with the Umbu right on his tail. What followed was one wacky chase as Naruto led not only the first team but 5 other Umbu teams on a merry chase through the city, with said blonde laughing the whole way. It wasn't long before almost every single Umbu was trying to catch him. 3 hours later, he dropped into an alley and grinned before disappearing and reappearing in the Hokage's office. Smirking at the old man who looked over at him, he said, "How was that for testing Umbu patrols, old man?" Sarutobi smirked as well and said, "I would say that was well done, Naruto. Now I think you should go on to class. Don't you agree, Irika?" Naruto hadn't noticed that Irika was standing inside the office until he heard, "Lord Hokage, you actually told him to do that?" Naruto turned around to see his fellow shinobi of the leaf and said, "Yeah, do you really think I would pull such a big prank if I didn't have the old man's go-ahead? What do you take me for, Irika, an academy student? That reminds me." Naruto went over to the window and ran through a few hand signs. 5 seconds later, one used seals on the monument that Naruto had placed down last night activated, and the paint evaporated, leaving the monument completely paint-free. Irika shook his head at the undercover Jounin and thought, "I'm getting too old for this." As the two were leaving the Hokage's office, one of the Umbu chasing Naruto entered the office. Seeing the blonde, the Umbu was about to grab him before the Hokage coughed and tossed the scroll that he had shown Naruto to him. Reading the scroll, the Umbu slumped and Sarutobi said, "I expect to see some improvements from this captain. We don't want an enemy shinobi being able to move around so easily." The Umbu nodded before bowing and left room. Irika and Naruto followed him as they headed back to the academy. As they exited the tower, Irika said, "I still cannot believe the Hokage actually gave you a mission like that, Naruto." Naruto merely shrugged and said, "Me either. But hey, I'm not complaining." Irika chuckled and said, "I doubt you ever would. You do realize, however, that you won't be able to do any more pranks in a few days, right?" Naruto made a sad face and said, "Don't remind me. I'm going to miss being able to let some steam out with pranks." The rest of the trip to the academy was relatively quiet after that. As they entered the building, they made a quick stop to grab some rope from the supply storage room, and Irika tied Naruto in order to keep up pretenses. 5 minutes later, Naruto was sitting on the ground in front of his classmates, as Irika lectured him much to the students' entertainment. Once he was done, he turned to the class and said, "Now then, since Naruto decided that class was not important enough to actually attend, we're going to have a pop quiz on the Henjutsu." There was a collective groan from the students while Naruto and Irika mentally smirked at their discomfort. As Irika untied Naruto and he joined the line, Shikamaru, who was next to him, looked at him and said, This is such a drag. Why do we have to have a quiz because you didn't come on time?" Naruto rose an eyebrow but didn't say anything. The students meanwhile performed the jutsu. All of them passed with only a few mistakes. When it came time for Naruto's turn, he stepped up. Irika looked up from his clipboard where he was marking the scores and said, "All right, Naruto, your turn." Naruto nodded and brought his hands up. He briefly considered pulling a prank on his fellow shinobi, but decided that he should probably give Irika a break now that he was getting close to the end of his undercover mission. So, shrugging to himself, He made the necessary hand signs before being covered in smoke. As it died down, a perfect copy of Irika was standing in front of said teacher. Irika nodded and put a mark down on his board as Naruto dropped his transformation and went back in line. After the quiz was done, Irika put his clipboard on his desk and said, "All right, class. Since the final exam is tomorrow, I'm giving you guys the rest of the day off so that you guys can prepare for it. If any of you want some last-minute practice for your kunai and shuriken throwing, I'll be at the target range. Other than that, good luck to you all and I'll see you tomorrow." Naruto stood up and followed Irika out the door, and the two headed towards the target range as the other students filed out, some heading to the range with the two shinobi and the others leaving the academy. Once they were at the target range, the students began picking up training kunai and shuriken and lined up for their chance at the targets. Irika was watching them from a safe distance, supervising with Naruto standing next to him, having been able to choose his gear first. "So what do you think of their chances during the exams?" Irika asked Naruto in a low voice so no one else could hear them. Naruto studied the students for a moment before saying, "None of them should really have any problems with the academy final exam as far as I can tell. As for the actual final exam, well, that really depends on who gets which sensei, since they usually do different tests even if they are generally the same idea. Any idea on the team placements yet?" Irika shrugged and said, "A few. The third is hoping for a repeat of the Ino Shikacho team's record with their children, and Hinata, Shino, and Kiba would make a good tracking team. Everyone else will probably just be a grouping by grade, and if I know they can work well together." Naruto nodded and said, "What about the Uchiha and the Haruno? It's obvious that they'll be together since they're the top two of the class, as sad as that is in her case, but who will you put with them?" Irika shrugged again and said, "I'm not sure. Truth be told, if you weren't undercover and your grades were an actual representation of your skills, then you would have been placed with them due to the balancing rule." Naruto made a face and said, "Thank God they're not then. I don't think I could stand being on their team." Irika nodded and continued, "The Hokage said that he would handle it though, so we'll have to see." Naruto nodded before walking over to the line of students and took his turn, making sure to miss every once in a while. Scene change. Ninja Academy day of final exam. Naruto currently had his head on his desk taking a nap as the students were taking their ninjutsu tests. When his name was finally called, Naruto walked into the room where Irika and Mizuki were. As he saw Mizuki, he mentally sneered and thought, "If this guy doesn't take the bait, I'm still gonna bust his ass to a biki. Genjutsu on my written, chakra strings diverting my kunai enough to barely hit targets, and whatever he's gonna try in here is more than enough to show he's a traitor in my book." Irika was having similar thoughts about his ex-friend since he had seen the genjutsu when Naruto had turned in his test. Shaking his head of those thoughts, he said, "Okay Naruto, all you have to do is make 3 clones and you graduate." Naruto nodded and faked a look of concentration before he made the necessary hand signs. Just as Naruto decided to overload the jutsu as much as possible, he felt a slight genjutsu come over him, disrupting it even more. Naruto mentally shrugged and let loose with the fire hose that was his chakra anyway. A single poof of smoke appeared to his side before a clone that looked like it had been beaten by a horde of Sasuke's fangirls was on the ground with its right foot twitching. Irika rose an eyebrow at the sight, having not only sensed the genjutsu but also how much chakra Naruto put into it, and thought, "How is that thing not a shadow clone? Naruto really let loose on that one. Oh well, time to get this show on the road." Sighing, he said, "I'm sorry Naruto, but you fail." Naruto hung his head down as Mizuki tried to defend him, never noticing the smirk on the blonde's face. An hour later, Naruto was on the swing in front of the academy watching the students being congratulated by their parents. Feeling a pang in his heart at the sight, he thought, "I wish Mom and Dad were here." He was brought out of his musings as he heard whispering directed towards him. "He's the only one who didn't graduate." "Yeah, well, good riddance. You know that he's the..." "Shoo, we're not supposed to talk about that." Naruto mentally rolled his eyes and thought, "Close-minded fools." He then sensed Mizuki's presence and thought, about damn time. Now let's see if he really took the bait or not. Scene change. Forest outside of the village. Naruto appeared at the designated spot for the transfer with the forbidden scroll on his back. Looking at his watch, he saw that he had 5 minutes before it was showtime. Deciding that he wanted an early warning on this one, Naruto crossed his hands and 4 poofs of smoke appeared. As the smoke cleared, revealing 4 copies of himself, he said, "Spread out and hide. Dispel yourself if you catch sight of the target." The clones nodded before giving salutes and took off into the forest. 2 minutes later, he felt one of his clones dispelling, telling him the traitor was almost at the meeting spot. Naruto dispelled the rest of the clones and sorted their memories before Mizuki landed in the clearing. Naruto, I see you have the scroll. Were you able to learn a jutsu from it? Mizuki asked, hoping to get Naruto in a sucker punch move. Naruto shrugged and said, didn't see much point since I can already use one of the jutsu in it. Here, let me show you. Mizuki's eyes went wide as Naruto crossed his hands, and a 20-foot radius ring of Naruto's surrounded the two. Naruto smirked as he tossed the forbidden scroll to one of the clones and pulled out his headband. As he tied it, he said, Mizuki, as a jounin of the Hidden Leaf Village, I have been ordered to bring you in for questioning. Will you come quietly? Mizuki just stared for a moment before he began laughing an insane laugh and said, Ha! That's a laugh, you demon brat. I have to admit that your genjutsu may have surprised me. But there is no way a dead-last demon brat like yourself could be a genin, let alone a jounin. Naruto smirked and said 2 words. Under. Cover. And with that, he disappeared, causing Mizuki to look around frantically before he felt a burning feeling on his back. Screaming out in pain, Mizuki turned around trying to find the blonde, but wound up with another line of pain going down his back again. If the traitor could see his back, he would have noticed his clothes burnt around 2 severe burns on his back that was in a cross shape. Mizuki suddenly screamed in pain again as a burn appeared running down first his right arm and then his left. As he tried to figure out what was happening, a burn trail appeared along the backs of both his legs, causing Mizuki to scream even louder. Finally, a burn ring appeared around his neck. Mizuki finally couldn't take any more and fainted from the pain. Naruto reappeared with his hands in half-ram signs held loosely by his sides with blue chakra surrounding the straight fingers in a thin shell. Dropping the chakra technique, Naruto walked over to Mizuki, shook his head and said, what a pansy, before taking out a spool of ninja wire and began tying the traitor. Once he was done, he took the scroll back from his clone before dispelling the ring. Picking up Mizuki in a fireman's lift, Naruto began heading to the Hokage's tower where his leader and the head of the interrogation department were waiting for his packages. A couple of days after the night that Naruto apprehended Mizuki, Naruto was talking with Sarutobi. They were in the ninja registration office, but with Naruto's shadow clones keeping a lookout for any of his classmates, the two could have conversations and still have an early warning system to tell Naruto when he needs to leave before they arrived. So mind telling me which teams you think will most likely make the cut, old man? Naruto asked as he leaned back in the chair for the graduated students to sit in while the Hokage went over their ID photos. Sarutobi gave a light nod and said, well, the younger Ino Shikacho team should be able to pass my son's test. The new tracking team comprised of Hinata Hyuga, Kiba Inuzuka, and Shino Aburame under Kurenai Yuhi will most likely pass as well. And the final team to most likely pass would be Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, and Sai under Kakashi Hatake. Naruto rose an eyebrow and said, Uncle Kakashi actually passing a team? Wow, either the civilian council ordered him to or it's going to snow in a desert somewhere. But who's this Sai person? I've never heard of him. Sarutobi sighed and said, he's one of Danzo's trainees. Said that he would be a good balancer for the team since he is more capable than young Sakura and almost as good as young Sasuke. Naruto narrowed his eyes when he heard the elder's name. The man had tried to approach Naruto more than once as he trained to become a shinobi, but he gave Naruto really bad vibes whenever he did. One of Naruto's clones suddenly dispelled itself, telling him that a little kid was coming towards the office with a shuriken in his hand. Frowning at the unusual sight, he looked over to the old man and signed what his clone had seen to him. Sarutobi sighed before signing back not to do anything right as the door opened and said kid came in running with the shuriken held haphazardly up high and yelling out, on guard, old man. Today is the day I finally defeat you. Ah! Unfortunately, the kid tripped on his scarf halfway to said old man. The kid groaned before getting back to his feet and said, what tripped me? Turning to Naruto, he said, you tripped me. Admit it. I would have gotten the old man if you hadn't. Naruto shook his head and thought, this must be the old man's grandson, Konohamaru, that I've been hearing about. I had wondered when I would meet him. Standing up, he went over to Konohamaru and kneeled down before plucking the shuriken out of the kid's hand faster than he could see and said, okay. First of all, you tripped on your scarf. Either shorten it or stop wearing it completely for a few years because you're still too young to actually wear that the way you are. Second, you were holding this wrong. You hold it the way you did, you're more likely to cut yourself than your enemies. You have to hold it between your fingers. And third, what the heck were you thinking of trying to take on the Hokage with a full-out charge? If you were an enemy, he could just kill you with a focused blast of his killing intent. The kid was staring at Naruto for a moment before he shook his head and opened his mouth to say something when the occupants of the room heard, "Honorable grandson? Are you in there?" A special jounin came in through the open doorway before noticing Naruto crouched down in front of his charge. The man stiffened before saying, "Hello, Uzumaki." Naruto's eyes narrowed slightly at how the man in front of him stiffened but dismissed it and said, "Ebisu, I take it this kid is your charge." Ebisu nodded and said, "That's right. I have been handpicked by the Lord Hokage to train his honorable grandson." Naruto shook his head and said, "Why does everyone feel the need to call him that? The kid's got a name, it should be used." Ignoring the look he was getting from said kid, he said, "If you need me, old man, I'll be at my training field on the monument." Sarutobi nodded and Naruto disappeared, making Konohamaru's eyes widen. Turning to his grandfather, he said, "Hey, old man, how did he do that?" Ebisu squawked out something about showing the Lord Hokage proper respect, but Sarutobi just chuckled and said, "Naruto is a very fast person, Konohamaru." Ebisu pushed his sunglasses higher up his nose and said, "Be that as it may, I still think he's too young to be a Jounin Lord Hokage." Konohamaru's eyes widened again, hearing that, while Sarutobi rose an eyebrow and said, "There have been others who have become Jounin at that early, if not earlier, in age, Ebisu. Itachi Uchiha and Kakashi Hatake, just to name a couple." Ebisu frowned and said, "With all due respect, Lord Hokage, but one of those went insane and killed his own clan while the other has degraded into a perverted delinquent who has no sense of punctuality whatsoever." Sarutobi frowned and said, "That's true." He then brightened and said, "But I don't think we need to worry about Naruto going down either of those paths, especially the on-time part. Hard to be late for anything when you can get from one side of the village to the next in less than 5 seconds. Ebisu was about to concede that point when he noticed that his charge had slipped away at some point in time. Looking around frantically, he said, "Where did the honored grandson go?" Sarutobi chuckled and said, "I think he went to go find Naruto. He certainly seemed to have made an impression on him." Said blonde was currently throwing kunai at targets in his training field on the Hokage monument behind a thin strip of woods, hiding it from any of the occasional visitors to the monument. It was a good place for him to train since it was a wide-open place that allowed him to place various targets around the area that he could work on his speed against, and also had woods all around that he could work on moving through at high speeds. Throwing another kunai into a target, he said, "You know, Konohamaru, if you want to talk to me, you're going to actually have to come out of hiding." Said kid came out from behind a tree and said, "How did you find me? I thought my hiding skills were the best." Naruto rose an eyebrow and said, "Maybe for a kid who hasn't had any of the stealth classes in the academy, but it would be pretty obvious to anyone Genin or higher, especially since you weren't trying to hide your chakra presence. So what did you need?" Konohamaru looked down for a moment and then said, "Teach me." Naruto's eyebrow shot back up and he said, "Teach you? Why would I do that? Don't you already have a teacher?" Konohamaru looked him in the eye and said, "Yeah, but he never teaches me anything. He just keeps saying that if I do what he says that I'll become Hokage quicker. And he never calls me by my name. He just calls me honored grandson just like everyone else. You are the only one besides my family to actually call me by my name." Naruto sighed and said, "Konohamaru, I can't be your teacher. I have missions I have to go on." Konohamaru looked back down before Naruto continued, "But I should be able to show you a thing or two every now and then." Konohamaru's head snapped back up and he said, "Really?" Naruto nodded and said, "Yup. Why don't we start with something pretty simple? Come on over where I'm standing and I'll show you the proper way to throw a kunai." As Konohamaru came over to where he was standing, Naruto went over to the targets and pulled out the kunai he had thrown before walking back to Konohamaru. Once he was beside the kid, he started explaining how to throw the throwing knives while Konohamaru listened intently. In a nearby tree, Ebisu watched the two and thought, "I guess the Lord Hokage was right about him. I think I'll let him continue these lessons every once in a while. It seems to be doing the honored grandson some good." As Konohamaru continued throwing the knives, trying to get the hang of it, Naruto looked over at the tree that Ebisu was in. The special jounin nodded to him before taking off. Naruto rose an eyebrow and thought, "I guess he's not so bad after all." 1 week after the Mizuki incident, this year's graduates were all in the familiar classroom for the last time. Or at least that's what they thought. Irika of course knew that quite a few would probably be back here or be out of the program completely. He quickly shook that thought out of his mind though as he stepped in front of the class and got their attention with his big head jutsu. Irika was about to begin his speech when one of the students said, "Hey, Irika-sensei, where is Mizuki-sensei?" Irika's face hardened but a voice from the doorway answered for him. Mizuki was a traitor that was apprehended a week ago during a sting operation when he attempted to steal the forbidden scroll of sealing. The class looked to the door and were surprised to see a familiar blonde leaning against the door frame. Kiba looked at him and said, "What are you doing here dead last? You were only supposed to come here if you graduated." Most of the other students agreed while Hinata looked at him in hope that he had actually somehow passed. Naruto pushed off from the doorway and flicked his headband that the graduates only just now realized was on his forehead before he said, "Mind how you talk to your superiors in Izuka. I was under orders by the Hokage for the past 3 years to draw that traitor into a trap and take care of him. I am not in the mood to deal with some fresh out of the academy rookie who can't accept the fact that someone was working undercover." The class was stunned with various thoughts running through their minds. Some were reevaluating what they thought they knew about the blonde while others were furious that the dead last had apparently been stronger than he let on. Guess who? Meanwhile, Hinata was just confused. She was glad that Naruto had failed on purpose but was beginning to wonder how much of what she had seen of the blonde that none of the others did had been real of if it all was just an act. Naruto then walked over to Irika and took a scroll out from his jounin vest that made the class even more shocked when they finally noticed that not only was Naruto not wearing his Kill Me orange jumpsuit, but was wearing the uniform of an elite shinobi of their hidden village. Giving the scroll to his comrade, he said, "Here, Irika, the Hokage wants you to go over this when you have the free time and tell him what you think once you're done." Irika nodded before he put the scroll in his chunnin vest and said, "Well do. Thanks, Naruto." Naruto nodded before he turned to face the class and gave a quick salute before seeming to disappear into thin air. Irika chuckled at the dumbfounded looks on all of the students which snapped them out of their shock and began shouting out questions. Irika got a tick mark on his head before he performed his patented big head jutsu again and said, "Be quiet. Now then, allow me to explain a few things that are to be expected of you and then I'll get to the teams." 10 minutes later, Hinata was sitting on a bench by herself as she slowly ate her lunch, as she tried to make sense of what she and the rest of the graduates had been told before their teams were announced. "Mind if I join you for a moment?" Hinata looked up and saw the blonde that she admired standing in front of her. Her eyes widened before she shook her head with a blush forming on her cheeks. Naruto sat down beside her and sighed and closed his eyes. After a moment he said, "I want to thank you, Hinata." Hinata looked at him in confusion and said, "For what, Naruto?" Naruto smiled and opened his eyes to look at Hinata and said, "For being the only one to actually treat me as a fellow classmate instead of the class punching bag. You're the only reason why I didn't lose it this year and just let loose on all of them. I can't tell you how many times I wanted to just say to hell with my mission and show them all exactly what I could do. Especially when it came to the Uchiha." Naruto had a scowl at the end but quickly shook his head and smiled again and said, "Anyway, I just wanted to say thanks and give you some advice that should really help you in the future. I know you have some confidence issues, Hinata," said Hyuga looked down, causing Naruto to put a hand on her shoulder to get her to look at him again. "But believe it or not, you actually make a fantastic kunoichi. You're one of the smartest girls the academy has produced this year, and when you get really serious your taijutsu can't be beat without the other person going through hell first." Hinata got another blush as Naruto continued. "Your only problem seems to be that you're afraid of what others may think of you. Anyway, here's my advice. When you have something that you have to do in front of or for someone, just forget about them." Seeing her confused look, he elaborated. "Forget that anyone is judging you on what you do. Simply focus on the task and do it. Don't worry about what others think about every single thing that you do. It's you who's doing them, not the other people around you. If it pleases them, then that's great, but if not, then it's not the end of the world. You'll just have to try harder next time. Understand?" Hinata nodded and Naruto smiled again before standing up. Turning to her, he said, "I need to get going now, but if you ever need some help or just someone to talk to, I'll do my best to be there for you, all right? And if you can't find me, just ask the Hokage, he'll know where I am." Hinata nodded again and softly said, "Thank you." Naruto nodded with his smile still in place and said, "No problem. See ya, Hinata." He gave a quick salute before disappearing to go do the other errands that he had been assigned for the day. Time skip. 1 month later. Naruto was currently teaching Konohamaru and his two friends Moegi and Undin the leaf balancing trick in his training field on the Hokage monument when a hawk began circling overhead and gave out a cry. The three kids lost their focus and looked up along with Naruto. Naruto whistled and the hawk landed on his outstretched arm, surprising the three kids. Naruto untied the note from the hawk's leg and sent it back to its roost with a small but quick jerk of his arm, letting it know that it could go back. As the hawk took off, Naruto looked at the note and frowned a little before putting the note in one of his vest pockets. Turning to the kids, he said, "The old man's calling. It's probably for a mission, so I'll probably be away for a while. Keep working on this, and when you can balance the leaf in your palms for a minute, move to your fingers and do the same. If you finish that before I get back, start adding leaves to each finger." The three kids nodded and Naruto disappeared from view. Naruto reappeared in the Hokage's office and came to attention before saying, "You summoned me, sir?" Sarutobi nodded and said, "Team 7 was just recently assigned an escort mission for a bridge builder from the Land of Waves. Their mission was to escort the man back to his home and protect him while he finished a bridge from any bandits that would turn up. However, the client lied about who would be after him and the team ran into a couple of Chunin-level ninja. Kakashi decided to continue the mission due to what he says are extreme circumstances. He has requested backup though, and I am sending you as it. You are to leave immediately. Expect more enemy shinobi, possibly at Jounin rank. Any questions?" Naruto shook his head and Sarutobi tossed him a scroll that Naruto caught before giving a salute and disappeared again, heading to his apartment to pack for the trip. Once Naruto had everything he would need, he quickly went to the village gate and showed Kotetsu and Izumo his mission scroll as he signed himself out. Once that was done, he quickly focused on the sense of extreme speed and took off. Minato Namikaze's Hirashin jutsu is heralded as a masterpiece of seals. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Hirashin was nothing more than Minato using his bloodline. When a bearer of the slipstream bloodline uses it, they move so fast that they get tunnel vision, making it very dangerous to use in a combat situation. And that is where the pronged kunai comes in. Each seal on the kunai actually contained some of Minato's chakra that would steadily pulse it out, allowing him to know where everything was around him. Now Naruto may not have any of the special kunai, but he could do one better whenever he joined the slipstream. Naruto instead put his status as a Jinchuriki to good use. With his seriously massive chakra stores, Naruto could send out a constant wave of chakra, giving him a real-time chakra field of vision that negated the tunnel vision effects of using his bloodline. And since this chakra sonar actually helped his chakra capacity grow as his body adapted to the repeated use of the technique, Naruto was able to keep the technique going for hours on end if needed, and that made for one scary shinobi that even his father would be hesitant to fight. As Naruto ran and his vision tunnelized, he began pulsing out his chakra. This was really the only way someone could tell Naruto was in the room if he had his bloodline active, even if he was running circles around the person. If a Hyuga was ever to try and spot him when his technique was going full blast, they would be instantly blinded by all the chakra in the air, which was why Naruto never used it whenever he knew Hinata was watching with her Byakugan active. As he ran, Naruto thought, "Hang on, Uncle Kakashi. I'm coming." Scene change. Scene of first fight with Zabuza. Kakashi was currently trapped in a sphere of water that Zabuza was holding together with his hand in it. Kakashi looked out at his team that was doing their best to not wet themselves, while Sasuke and Sakura anyway, and shouted as best as he could through the technique at them. "Don't just stand there. Take the client and go. His water clones can't get too far from the original." This fight was over the instant he caught me. But before the trio of Genin could say anything, Zabuza suddenly yelled and pulled his hand out of the water to look at his arm that was completely covered in burns from shoulder to wrist. As the water sphere burst apart, Kakashi caught himself from falling completely into the water and looked up just in time to see a knee planting itself into Zabuza's chin. Zabuza shot up and back before hitting the water and bounced 5 times hard over it before sinking. As he watched the missing knee sink, Kakashi heard a voice say, "Uncle Kakashi, how many times do I have to pull your bacon out of the fire?" Sakura and Sasuke had absolutely no clue whatsoever what just happened. One moment Kakashi's begging them to take their client and get as far away as possible. The next instant Zabuza lets the technique he trapped Kakashi in drop for some unknown reason and then is sent flying by a familiar blonde who just appeared out of absolutely nowhere. Sai was the only one who had any idea at the moment where Naruto came from and how he had come to be there. After all, he had been informed by Danzo about the blonde. Meanwhile, Kakashi was getting to his feet as Naruto looked over to the side at him and said, "You all right there, Uncle Kakashi?" Kakashi nodded, but before he could say anything, a water dragon formed over where Zabuza had sunk and rushed toward the two. Naruto disappeared and then reappeared on the shore with Kakashi right behind him as the dragon slammed down right where they had been a second before throwing up waves. As they settled, they showed Zabuza standing where they had been. He looked at Naruto with contempt and said, "I'll have to admit that was a pretty good shot, kid. And whatever you did to my arm hurts, but there is no way a runt like you has any chance against me. Still, I'm curious. What's your name, boy?" Naruto smirked and said, "My name is unimportant Browless. I will tell you that my code name is Kitsune, although others have began calling me the Flash Fire." Zabuza frowned, but before he could do or say anything, Naruto disappeared again. As Zabuza began looking around for the brat, he began sensing a ton of chakra permeating the air. It was like when he used the hidden mist jutsu, only it was 5 times more potent. Back on the shore, the 3 genin felt it as well. Sakura looked around with wide eyes and thought, "Is all this Naruto? How could he have this much chakra?" Sasuke clenched his fist and thought, "Is this how much the dead last was hiding? I should have that power, not him." Sai was merely observing to the best of his abilities. Danzo had always told him and the rest of the Root Umbu that Naruto had the potential to be even better than the 4th and to consider themselves lucky if they ever witnessed him in action. Tazuna meanwhile was just trying to figure out how a boy no older than his escorts could just disappear like that. Kakashi was most likely the calmest out of everyone as he simply waited for Naruto to make his move. He was ready to be the backup for his sensei's son if he needed it, but he highly doubted he would. Then Naruto's voice sounded from all around at once, reminding the 3 genin and bridge builder what Zabuza had done just earlier. There are 4 types of burns: 1st degree, 2nd degree, 3rd degree, and 4th degree. Which burn should I use today? Everyone except for Kakashi was looking around trying to find the blonde while wondering at the same time what the hell he was talking about. That all changed when they heard, "Why don't we start with 2nd?" Right after he said that, Zabuza screamed in pain as a 2nd-degree burn suddenly appeared going across his chest from right hip to left shoulder. Right after, his left arm became completely covered in burns just like his left one, only these were much more painful. Even from the distance the genin were at, they could see the big blisters that were already beginning to form. Zabuza then yelled again and turned around trying to hit something behind him, showing everyone the 5X-shaped burns on his back that were placed with one right in the middle with the other 4 connected with one on each of the 4 lines of the center one. Zabuza roared in pain again as his pant legs burned near the back of his knees, showing even more burns there. He then shouted out, "Where the hell are you?" Everyone then heard chuckling before Naruto said, "What's the matter, Zabuza? I thought you were a master of silent killing. Surely you can find one little kid without too much problems, right?" Before Zabuza could say anything though, he flew to the side before abruptly switching directions constantly like he was a pinball stuck in the bouncer section of an invisible pinball machine. Finally, after a minute of this, he was suddenly sent flying into a tree trunk. Zabuza screamed out in pain as the burns on his back hit the tree trunk, causing the blisters to pop. Naruto reappeared on a tree branch to his right. Zabuza looked up at him and said, "What are you?" Naruto looked down at him and said, "Your worst nightmare." All of a sudden, 3 senbon needles embedded themselves in the side of Zabuza's neck, causing him to slump over dead, startling everyone else. Naruto hopped down and said, "You sure took your sweet time, Hunter Nin." Everyone looked up to where Naruto was looking and saw a Hunter Nin of the Mist who looked to be no older than Naruto and the genin. He can only be about as old as Naruto, but he's a Hunter Nin already. Naruto I can understand since he uses his bloodline. But for a mist shinobi to be a Hunter Nin at such a young age, how strong is this guy? Kakashi thought as he studied the kid. Sasuke was fuming. Damn it. First the dead last and now this new guy. How many people my age are there that are stronger than me? I need more power. It's the only way I can kill him. Sakura was still shocked at how sudden Zabuza had been defeated and then killed, while Tazuna was just glad that it was all over. The Hunter Nin dropped down to the ground near Zabuza's body and said, "My apologies, but it was apparent that you had everything under control. Besides, I'm not sure I would have been able to handle Zabuza if you hadn't worn him down like you did. Now, if you will excuse me, I must dispose of the body." The Hunter Nin made a hand sign and then disappeared with the body in a whirlwind of leaves. Kakashi lowered his headband covering his Sharingan eye and slumped a little before saying, "I'm glad that's over." Naruto looked over and noticed his uncle's slumped over form and said, Does that thing still drain you as bad as before, Uncle Kakashi? Kakashi nodded and said, yeah, but it's not as bad as if I had actually used it for more than keeping up with Zabuza. It would have been worse if I had actually had to use it to copy any of his jutsu. Naruto hummed and said, still, we better find you a place to lie down soon. Turning to Tazuna, he said, how close are we to your house, old man? About 5 more miles. Tazuna said. Naruto nodded and went over to Kakashi before slinging one of his arms over his shoulders and made a lead-the-way motion with his free hand. As the genin fell in around them, Sakura decided to ask about the things on her mind. Hey Naruto? Getting a In response, she continued, what exactly did you do back there? You just disappeared for a while and then these burns appeared and after that Zabuza just started flying through the air. Naruto thought about whether or not he should tell her anything considering how she had treated him in the past but decided that he might as well, otherwise she and the Uchiha would never leave him alone. It's actually pretty simple, Haruno. I merely moved faster than the eye could see. Those burns that appeared on Zabuza's body resulted from the friction of pressing my fingers against his skin while I moved so fast around him. As for the flying around bit, I was simply hitting him with my fists. Sakura frowned and said, wait, if those burns resulted from friction, why aren't your fingers burned? And for that matter, how did just your fingers burn Zabuza's whole arm? Naruto shook his head and said, you know Haruno, for the smartest girl in your class, you sure don't think. What is the most important thing that a shinobi uses that separates us from civilians? Sakura's eyes lit up in understanding before she scowled at the tone of voice Naruto used. She refrained from hitting him though since he was carrying her sensei, like she could without Naruto allowing it. She then frowned and said, you still didn't answer the other question. Naruto shrugged and said, because it's obvious, Haruno. Instead of just my fingers those 2 times, I simply placed both hands around the arm around the shoulder and rubbed against the entire arm on the way down. Sakura looked down, obviously thinking that she should have realized that. Sasuke meanwhile was trying to glare a hole right through Naruto's back. Dobe, how did you get so much power? Naruto glanced back and said, watch your tone, rookie. I've been an actual shinobi far longer than you have. That's why the Hokage chose me to go undercover and not you. Sasuke grinded his teeth and said, answer me. Sasuke, that's enough, Kakashi said, finally entering the conversation. He looked over his shoulder at the genin and continued with a glare. I will not have you disrespect a jounin of our village. Am I clear? Sasuke glared at his teacher but finally ground out a yes, sensei. The rest of the way to Tazuna's house was pretty much quiet after that. Once at the house, Tazuna knocked on the door. It opened to reveal a woman who was definitely pretty. Smiling, she hugged Tazuna and said, Dad, you made it back all right. Looking at the shinobi, she said, are these? Tazuna nodded and said, yes, these are the shinobi that I hired. The blonde was sent as reinforcements and I must say I'm glad he was. Sasuke scowled at that but wisely stayed silent, while Tazuna's daughter smiled at them and said, thanks for keeping Dad safe. I know he can be a handful sometimes. She ignored the hey from her father and continued, my name's Tsunami, by the way. Naruto rose his hand and Tsunami shook it as he said, Naruto Uzumaki. Jounin of the village hidden in the leaves. The man currently on my shoulder is Kakashi Hatake, the same. Behind me are Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, and Sai, genin of the village hidden in the leaves, and Uncle Kakashi's team. Tsunami rose an eyebrow at the word uncle, and she wasn't the only one. Sakura had been wondering why Naruto had called her sensei uncle when he first arrived but had forgotten to ask him about it, since she was more interested in finding out how Naruto had did what he did during the fight. Uncle, you two don't look related, Tsunami said. Naruto chuckled and said, oh, we're not. Not by blood anyway. I guess you could say he's a family friend of mine. Now I don't mean to be rude, but if it wouldn't be too much, could we lie him down somewhere? He drained himself pretty badly during the last fight. Tsunami shook her head and moved to the side and said, of course. Sorry about that. Just put him upstairs in the guest bedroom. Naruto nodded and entered the house followed by the others. The genin sat themselves around the living room once they entered, leaving Naruto by himself as he helped his mentor up the stairs to the guest room. Once there, Naruto gently laid Kakashi down on the bed before going to the door and making sure that they were alone. Finding no one coming up the stairs, Naruto closed the door and placed a privacy seal on it before turning back to Kakashi, who had been watching him. So you figured it out as well. Kakashi said in a serious voice. Naruto nodded and said, yeah, that hunter went right for the neck with those needles of his. Less muscle there to get in the way of a pressure point shot. How long do you think we have? Kakashi thought and then said, at least a week. That's how long it will take him to recover from the fake death state. Maybe a little more if they try to fully heal the burns you gave him. Naruto frowned and said, I shouldn't have played around with him. I should have just stabbed him in the heart when I first got here. Kakashi shook his head and said, we both know that you hate taking a life so carelessly, and there's nothing we can do about it now but prepare for them. We're gonna have to get the genin up to speed. We should probably teach them tree climbing. Naruto's eyes widened and he said, you haven't taught them that yet? What have you been doing for the past month? Kakashi frowned and said, trying to get them to work as a team. What's the point in teaching them high-class moves and jutsu if they wind up not caring if they hit their teammates or not? You've never had problems working with others, but with them, they can't even agree on who cleans up what part of a park. Naruto sighed and said, I see. Well, in that case, I don't really blame you. I guess while you're teaching them, I'll guard Tazuna. Get some rest, uncle. We can tell the rooks tomorrow. Kakashi nodded and Naruto turned around and took down the privacy seal before stepping out the door. Closing it softly, he walked down the stairs and entered the living room. Sakura looked up as he came in and said, Naruto, how is sensei? Naruto shrugged and said, he's fine, Haruno. A little tired, but nothing that a good night's rest shouldn't cure. Make sure you guys get a good night's rest tonight as well. I know for a fact that Kakashi is going to give you guys some hard training tomorrow. If any of you guys need me, I'll be outside setting up some patrols with my shadow clones. And then I'll be on the roof. Naruto turned and left the living room again and left the house itself. Crossing his hands, a platoon of clones appeared. Looking at them, he said, I want half of you to set up a perimeter around this house. The other half head to the bridge and make sure no one tries anything funny with it. The clones all saluted before taking off to complete their task. Naruto then turned towards the house and jumped up onto the roof and settled down. And now we wait. The next morning, Kakashi joined everyone at the table for breakfast. As he sat down, he said, guys, there's something important that we have to tell you. The three genin looked at Kakashi and Sakura said, what is it, Kakashi-sensei? Zabuza's alive. Everyone but Naruto gaped at him. Sakura was the first to recover and said, are you sure, Kakashi-sensei? Kakashi nodded, but it was Naruto who answered. The hunter nin used senbon needles. They're highly accurate and the hunter shot for the neck. There are certain pressure points on the body that will put someone in a death-like state. And the neck has the least muscles that would interfere with hitting those points. Add to the fact that the hunter moved the body when he was supposed to destroy and right where it was, and you have a fake hunter nin working with Zabuza. Sasuke scoffed and said, and you call yourself a jounin. You couldn't even catch a fake in the act. Naruto rose an eyebrow and said, well, I didn't see you doing anything Uchiha. And besides, even if I attacked that hunter, if it had been a real one, what do you think the repercussions would be for our village? Kakashi and I had to take that chance or risk a war between the leaf and mist. So why don't you keep your mouth shut since you obviously have no idea what you're supposed to do in that kind of situation? Sasuke glared and was about to say something when Sakura shouted out, don't talk to Sasuke-kun like that, and tried to hit Naruto. As the fist came towards him, the two disappeared and then reappeared against a wall with Naruto's left wrist pressing her throat in and a kunai in his right hand holding her chin upwards. Naruto glared at Sakura as the kunoichi stared in shock and horror. Naruto then growled out, listen Haruno, and listen good. Your dear Sasuke isn't the top dog and he never was. You all think he's someone special and call him a genius, but guess what? He's not a genius, he's just a regular Uchiha who hasn't even activated his Sharingan yet. The only Uchiha genius that the Leaf Village produced was his brother Itachi, and he never relied on his Sharingan to copy other people's jutsu like the rest of that band of thieves. And if you ever try to attack one of your superiors again, I will write you up so fast the Hokage will get paper cuts from it. Am I clear? Sakura nodded as much as she could with a kunai under her chin and Naruto released her. Turning around, he saw Sasuke glaring at him and he said, the same goes for you as well, Sasuke. We aren't in the academy anymore. Get your act together or leave the program. We don't need upstarts like you trying to prove you're better than everyone else. Turning to Tazuna, he said, I'll be waiting outside to escort you to the bridge. The old man nodded and Naruto walked out. As he left, A small boy came downstairs rubbing one of his eyes from sleep before looking around at the expressions on everyone's faces and asked, "What's going on?" Kakashi shook his head and said, "Oh, nothing much, just a little dispute." He then stood up and said, "Sakura, Sasuke, Sai, finish up your breakfast and then meet me outside. We have to get you guys as up to speed as possible for when Zabuza comes back in a week." Sakura looked at him and said, "But Kakashi-sensei, what could we possibly do in a week that will prepare us to fight Zabuza? We couldn't do anything last time." Kakashi merely smiled and said, "You'll see." 15 minutes later, Tazuna and the rest of the people working on the bridge were staring as a shadow clone was reporting to Naruto with the rest of the clones spread out along the bridge, keeping an eye out for anyone trying to harm the bridge. "All quiet, nothing to report, sir," the clone said as it gave a salute to its creator. Naruto nodded before turning back to Tazuna and said, "Hey Tazuna, need some extra hands." Meanwhile, Kakashi was leading his team into the forest. Once Kakashi thought they were at a good spot, he turned to his students and said while giving his smile, "All right, my lovable students, today we are going to learn how to climb trees." Sakura and Sasuke looked at him like he was crazy before Sakura said, "But Kakashi-sensei, we can already climb trees." Kakashi smiled again and said, "Ah, but can you do it without using your hands?" Kakashi then turned and walked to a tree before wailing up it. Sasuke and Sakura's jaws dropped while Sai simply looked on. Kakashi reached the lowest branch of the tree about 20 feet up and hung down from the bottom of it. Keeping his smile, Kakashi said, "This is a chakra exercise that is essential to all ninja. Using your chakra, you can stick to the sides of any solid object. You must focus your chakra to your feet to stick to the surface. Too much and you will blast yourself off. Too little and you will slip off." Kakashi reached into his kunai pouch and threw 3 kunai on the ground in front of his 3 students' feet and said, "You should use those to mark your progress. I'd suggest getting a running start." Sakura and Sasuke got determined looks as they picked up the kunai while Sai simply bent down to pick his up. The 3 then focused on separate trees and took off at them at a run. Sasuke made it up about 10 steps before the bark suddenly splintered and Sasuke launched himself back as a small crater the size of his foot and half an inch deep appeared. As Sasuke backflipped and landed in a crouch, he thought, so it's an exercise of balance. Too much chakra and you push the object away from you. Too little and you don't stick. This is easy. Sasuke looked up, his eyes widened when he saw that Sakura was on a branch at the same level as Kakashi. "What are you doing on the ground, dickless?" Sasuke's head jerked to the side and his eyes virtually bugged out when he saw that Sai was on a branch of his own about 10 feet above Sakura's position. Sakura's file said that she had perfect chakra control. And I imagine that Danzo had made sure Sai was as capable as possible. Sakura meanwhile was shooting a glare and shouted out, "Don't insult Sasuke-kun." So much for the heir of the most powerful clan of the Hidden Leaf Village. It seems like Sakura and Sai are a bit better at this than you are, Kakashi said, trying to motivate Sasuke. Sasuke growled before rushing the tree again. Scene change. Tazuna's bridge 30 minutes later. The bridge was buzzing with activity as the workers worked beside some of Naruto's clones. Each worker had a clone to help him who was being taught how to do what they were doing. The general plan was that since clones were only made out of chakra, they could continue working when their teachers were taking a lunch break while said teachers could watch and correct if they had to. That way they could get an extra hour in building the bridge but still leave at the usual time. Naruto had briefly considered making more clones when the workers were done for the day with the sole purpose of carrying on for the night, but Tazuna shot the idea down, stating that even if the clones learned how to do everything perfectly, he and the other workers would have to check each section they built, and if any of them weren't up to spec they would just have to tear them down, which would be a waste of materials. Naruto conceded the point, though he did say that he would keep those clones around at night again to guard the bridge, since Gato might just decide to try and blow the bridge up and be done with it. Tazuna had paled at that and readily agreed that it would be a good idea. That night at dinner, Naruto was sitting next to Tsunami's son Inari when Team 7 came in the house with the 3 genin in various states. Sakura came in looking absolutely exhausted, but other than that fine. Sai looked like he had done nothing more than have a light jog for about an hour. But it was Sasuke's appearance that nearly made Naruto laugh. He was covered in scuff marks and looked about ready to collapse. "You guys have fun?" Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow. Sai didn't say anything and instead just sat down and began eating while Sakura groaned in response before following suit. Sasuke glared at the blonde before following suit, causing Naruto to chuckle. "What's so funny, dope?" Sasuke growled out. Naruto's face instantly turned serious and he said, "Watch your attitude, rookie. Like I said to Inuzuka, I wasn't in the mood to deal with a rookie that couldn't handle the fact that I was undercover and I'm still not. You're not the greatest thing to grace the earth and you never will be. You aren't even the greatest Uchiha. You're just a second-rate one who hasn't even activated his Sharingan yet." Sasuke roared and launched himself at the blonde only to be caught by Kakashi. "Calm down, Sasuke. Naruto, I would have expected better from you," Kakashi said, glaring at Sasuke and then looking at Naruto in a disappointed manner. Naruto shrugged and said, "What do you want me to say, Uncle Kakashi? The Uchiha needs to learn that he's not as great as he thinks he is. And since there is no real way to sugarcoat it in a way that he would still understand, I simply told him in the most straightforward way possible." Naruto's eyes then narrowed and he said, "And as far as I'm concerned, the Uchiha were all overrated anyway. They were nothing but thieves stealing the hard work of others. The only one who wasn't like that was Itachi. No wonder he went and killed the rest of his clan. He must have gotten sick of all their arrogance." Sasuke roared and struggled to break free of Kakashi's grip and shouted out, "You take that back." Naruto stood up and began walking out of the kitchen. As he passed through the door, he called out, "Why would I take back the truth?" An hour later, Kakashi came out of the window to his room and found Naruto staring at the moon. As he sat down beside him, he said, "I really wish you wouldn't antagonize my students, Naruto." Naruto simply sighed and said, "I'm sorry, Uncle Kakashi. Really, I am. But considering what I went through last year, especially at the hands of those two, I find it real hard not to. Haruno I may change my mind about if she gets her act together. But the Uchiha is a real piece of work that needs to be brought back down to earth. Asking me to be nice to him would be like asking me to move the Hokage monument by myself. It just can't be done, especially considering what that clan has done to me in the past." Kakashi sighed and said, "I know where you're coming from, Naruto, I do, but they're my responsibility. Just try not to start any more fights, all right?" Naruto nodded and said, "I'll try, Uncle Kakashi. I promise." Kakashi nodded as well before heading back to his window and said, "Good night, Naruto. Don't stay up too late." "Yes, mother," Naruto said with a smile, earning a chuckle from his fellow Jounin. Scene change. Zabuza's room in Gato's base of operations. Zabuza hissed in pain and then sighed in relief as his tool placed some more cream on the burns on his back. Thanks to Gato, Haku had been able to procure fast-acting medicine for the burns that the blonde had given him. They would be gone by the end of the week. As Zabuza thought about their next fight, he said, "Haku." "Yes, Zabuza-sama? I want you to find out anything you can about that blonde brat. And when the time comes, I want you to fight him. You're probably the only one who can keep up with his speed." "As you wish, Zabuza-sama." The next morning, when Naruto was exiting the house with Tazuna, Kakashi had Sai join Naruto in guarding the bridge since he had mastered the tree-climbing exercise. When Naruto had asked him why he wasn't going to teach the boy water walking, Kakashi simply smiled and said, "I'll leave that to you." Naruto had simply rolled his eyes and motioned Sai to follow them. When the trio reached the bridge, Naruto dispelled the clones from the night before and replaced them with a fresh batch. No use giving himself a massive headache by absorbing more than a full day's memories from so many clones all at once. Naruto then created 2 more clones, one to stick with Tazuna and the other to show Sai how to walk on the water to the bridge. Once everything was taken care of at the bridge, Naruto took off, shocking all of the workers by seeming to disappear in thin air. Naruto joined the slipstream and took off to explore the island a bit. While he could have sent clones to do this, it was much quicker for Naruto to do by himself since he could use his chakra sonar technique and not worry about being dispelled when he ran out of it. First though, he wanted to see how his former classmates were doing. Scene change, Team 7's training area. Kakashi suddenly sensed a ton of chakra coming from the direction of the unfinished bridge and thought, "Here he comes." Right after that thought, he said, "Hello, Naruto." Naruto smirked from his position next to his fellow Jounin and mentor and said, "Hey, Uncle Kakashi. Just wanted to see how they're doing and tell you that I'm going to look around a bit." Kakashi nodded and said, "I have no problems with that. But if you find Gato's base, don't do anything drastic without telling me first. No telling what would happen if we acted too hastily. And as you can see, they're doing fairly well." It was true. Sasuke had made it about halfway to the top while Sakura was resting in one of the highest branches. Naruto nodded before he gave Kakashi a salute and took off again. True to Kakashi's prediction, Naruto had found Gato's base. As he studied the base from a high tree branch wondering if he should go ahead and scout it, he spotted a figure that looked like a boy his age exiting the ramp and entered the woods. Deciding to follow the boy, he dropped down from the tree and began following him using his high jounin stealth to follow him without chakra. He had a theory who the boy was, and it would do him no good to tip off the kid by using chakra if he was right. Following the boy to a field where he began picking herbs, Naruto considered his options. He could either confront the guy now and possibly save himself the trouble of having to fight both him and Zabuza at once at a later date. He could just leave the boy alone and hope for the best, something that Naruto really did not want to do. Or he could try to learn as much as he could about the boy. Naruto then remembered Kakashi's order. Even though the two were both jounin, Kakashi had superiority out in the field due to him having been a former Umbu captain before he left and became a regular jounin. Deciding that his third option was still within his order's parameters, Naruto moved around the clearing to make it seem like he came from the village. Once he was in place, Naruto began walking into the clearing. The boy quickly caught sight of him, and Naruto noticed the boy almost imperceptibly stiffening when he saw who it was, confirming to Naruto that he was aware of who he was facing. Naruto put on a warm smile and said, "I must admit, I wasn't expecting to find someone way out here." The boy smiled as well, though Naruto noticed most of it didn't reach his eyes, and said, "Well, this is the best place to find the herbs that I need." Naruto nodded and said, "True. Some of these herbs are pretty good for medicine. Take this one for example." He bent down to pick up a herb he recognized and said, "This one is a good one for treating the pain that comes from first and second degree burns if mixed with a couple of others and turned into a paste." The boy cocked his head and said, "You seem very knowledgeable about them." Naruto chuckled and said, "I had to be. I can't tell you how many times I've burned myself." The boy rose an eyebrow and said, "Really? You don't look like you've been burned often." Naruto smirked and said, "And you don't look like you're actually a boy with that pink kimono, but we all like to hide certain things from others." The boy stiffened just a little and said, "Yes, that's true." Naruto then shook his head and said, "Where's my manners? I'm Naruto." The boy gave another one of those smiles that didn't quite reach his eyes and said, "Haku." Naruto nodded and said, "So, you collecting these for someone who needs them, or are you like me who likes to have some handy in case of emergencies?" Haku looked hesitant before he said, "These are for someone that's a precious person of mine." "Tell me, Naruto, do you have anyone that is precious to you?" Naruto cocked his head trying to figure out where the boy in front of him was coming from, but said, "Yeah, I've got a few." Haku smiled again, and this time it did meet his eyes as he said, "Then you must be truly strong, for I believe that it is only when you are protecting something that is precious to you do you become truly strong." Naruto smiled and said, "A good thing to believe." He then frowned and said, "Unfortunately, I know one person who would not agree. His whole clan was killed and he's obsessed with revenge. All he cares about is getting stronger, and he thinks that everyone else is just dragging him down." Haku frowned at this but shook it off and said, "Maybe he will come to his senses someday." "Yeah, maybe," Naruto said softly before seeming to brighten up a bit. Smiling at Haku, he said, "Well, I better get going. See ya, Haku." And with a two-fingered salute he turned around and disappeared, making Haku go wide-eyed. As Haku recovered from his surprise, he thought, "I hope I can match his speed when the time comes." As Naruto ran, he thought, "Now that is one interesting kid." Naruto and Sai were seated next to Tazuna and Tsunami as they ate their dinner, waiting for the rest of Team 7 to come in from training. Inari sat across from the two Nin, glaring at them as he ate. Hearing the door open, Naruto sent a quick chakra pulse that was so small, only a sensor could sense it if they weren't right next to the blonde. Sai rose an eyebrow as Naruto went back to eating, unconcerned with whoever was coming in. Sai understood why as Kakashi walked in with a slightly exhausted Sakura and a moderately tired Sasuke following him. As the three sat down, Kakashi turned to Naruto and said, "So how did Sai do?" Naruto shrugged and said, "About as well as can be expected. He got the concept almost instantly, but as we both know, it takes more than that when it comes to walking on any kind of liquid." Kakashi nodded as Naruto continued. He was able to stand after about half an hour, but it took him a bit longer to learn how to walk around a bit without sinking. He still can't do it while fighting though, so we'll have to work on that tomorrow. Kakashi nodded before he began eating. Turning to the other two genin, Naruto rose an eyebrow and said, "And how are you two doing?" Sasuke glared at him while Sakura hesitantly said, "I pretty much have it completely mastered. Right now Kakashi-sensei has me running up and down as many times as I can to build up my chakra reserves. And Sasuke-kun is a little over 3/4 of the way to the top." Naruto nodded as Sasuke sent Sakura a glare for telling the blonde that he still felt was a dead last that he hadn't reached the top yet. "Why do you even bother?" Inari asked as he glared at them all. "Come again?" Naruto asked as he took another bite and swallowed before looking at Inari in curiosity. "I said, why do you even bother? It's not like it will help you when Gato comes to kill you all. You're just wasting your time. Gato is invincible and nothing you do will stop him. You don't even know anything about us or this village, and yet you come prancing in so happy and carefree, not knowing anything about pain, and you make me sick." "Inari," Tsunami said sternly before a raised hand from both Kakashi and Naruto stopped her from berating her child. Naruto shot a questioning look to Kakashi, who nodded, answering the unspoken question. Naruto then turned back to Inari and said, "Inari, don't talk about what you don't know as if you do. You say we don't know anything about what pain is, but in reality, compared to some of us at this table, you don't even know the meaning of the word." Inari glared, but before he could open his mouth, Naruto continued. "Let me guess. You probably lost someone to Gato, right? Most likely your father or someone who was like one to you, since it's only you, your mother, and your grandfather living here, and that picture on the wall looks like a person has been ripped out of it. Well, let me tell you something, you only lost one person, but Uncle Kakashi lost not only his father, but his 2 teammates and his teacher as well. The Uchiha kid here lost his entire clan in one night. And I've had it even worse. I've seen the dark side of humanity, and let me tell you, it is not pretty. I grew up an orphan the day I was born. From day one I was on my own because almost my entire village sees me as worse than an outcast, and let me tell you, it was not easy. The orphanage threw me out when I was around 3, and I've had to live about 2.5 years on the streets wondering if I will be able to find my next meal in time. I've had to avoid mobs who wanted to beat me into an inch of my life over as long a period of time as they could before finally finishing me off. Store owners spit in my face and throw me out of their stores almost constantly. And those who do sell to me usually overcharge me or sell me shoddy goods. I can't even make any friends of my own age because parents would always tell their kids that I was either a bad person or even a monster. Some would even beat me if I even tried to speak to their kids. You think you got it bad? You have no idea how truly blessed you are to live like you do. You at least still have your mother and grandfather. So don't say that I don't know what pain is, because in my eyes you're just a little kid who can't handle the real world. People die, Inari. It's a fact of life that none of us can escape. Yeah, you lost someone when he was killed by Gato, but you aren't the first person to lose someone, and you sure as hell won't be the last. It's not the pain that we face in our lives that define us, but how we handle it. There are those like you who throw themselves pity parties all their lives doing nothing about it. And then there are those like your grandfather who feels the pain but still goes on doing his absolute best to make a difference. Think about that and then ask yourself this. Do you want to continue doing nothing as the pain constantly builds on itself? Or do you want to do your absolute best to make sure nothing like the event happens again? Will you stand up in the night and stand firm? Or will you let the darkness consume you? Only you can make that choice, Inari, and there will come a time when you must choose. And that choice will have an impact so large on your life that you will only be able to tell how much it did years from the event. Everyone besides Kakashi was staring at him as he stood up and walked out of the house. As the door to the house closed, Tazuna turned to Kakashi and said, "If I wasn't looking at him as he said that, I would have thought an adult was doing the talking." Kakashi nodded as he sighed and said, "He's had to grow up faster than anyone else in his generation." Was he telling the truth? Did he really have it that bad? Tsunami asked as she wiped away the tears that had sprouted during Naruto's little speech. "Worse," Kakashi said before turning to Inari and said, "Naruto is right, Inari. Everyone feels pain at some point in their life, but it's how you handle it that shows what kind of person you really are." Kakashi then stood up and went up the stairs to the room he was sharing with the other males. As he did, Sakura and Sasuke pondered what Naruto told them, since they had no idea how rough his life had been. The only thing that they had seen when they saw Naruto had been the smiling idiot who was always claiming that he was going to be Hokage. Sai was going over the information that Naruto had gave as well and thought, so that is how he is so strong while still so young. He had to become stronger than most to survive. Danzo-sama was right. He is not one to be underestimated. Scene change, forest clearing. Shadow clone jutsu. As the call went out, numerous clones appeared in bursts of smoke as the original stood in front of them. All right, listen up. I want all but 5 of you to work on moving through this forest as fast as you can without using our sonar technique. We're good up to low Jounin speeds, so let's see if we can't reach mid Jounin by morning. Remember to create and dispel every hour and a half. Understood? Hi! Get to it! Most of the clones took off, leaving only the 5 clones who were at the front of the group. Naruto grinned as he looked at them while reaching into his kunai pouch with both hands and said, "Well then, shall we get started?" The 5 clones gave predatory grins as they also reached into their kunai pouches. In one simultaneous movement, the 6 blondes brought out their hands with the kunai twirling around their fingers before ending in reverse grips and disappeared. For the next 3 hours, the only thing that the clones working on nighttime travel without the sonar technique could hear was one practically continuous sound of metal against metal. Scene change, Tezuna's house. The next morning, everyone was seated at the kitchen table eating breakfast except for one blonde. Sakura glanced at the empty seat that had a plate placed in front of it before turning to her teacher and said, "Kakashi-sensei, don't you think one of us should go looking for him?" Kakashi chuckled and said, "Now, Sakura, I know you're worried that Naruto didn't come back in, but if there is one thing that I have learned about Naruto from all the years that I've known him, it's that he almost always comes back before losing consciousness." Sakura frowned at this, not really reassured by her sensei. The sound of the front door opening caught everyone's attention as Naruto tiredly shuffled in. Most of the people seated at the table widened their eyes or raised their eyebrows as they noticed all of the slashes and tears on Naruto's clothes. As Naruto sat down with a tired grunt and pulled his plate towards him, Kakashi chuckled and said, "So how many did you get up to and last against Naruto?" Naruto tiredly took a bite out of his breakfast and swallowed before saying 5, and we went all night. Wouldn't have been so bad if I didn't have about 100 clones working on moving at night at mid-Jounin level speeds without using my technique. Damn clones all decided to pop within a few minutes of each other when the sun rose up when they knew that they were supposed to do 1 per minute. Kakashi rose his visible eyebrow and said, "Wow, that's pretty good all things considered. Usually you can only go halfway through the night if there's more than 3 of you." Sakura looked confused as both Sai and Sasuke gave Naruto calculating looks. Turning back to Kakashi as Naruto began eating again, clearly showing that he wanted food at the moment, she said, "I don't understand, Kakashi-sensei. Why would Naruto need to work on moving at Jounin speeds at night if he's already so fast? And what kind of training are you talking about?" "I'm right here, you know," Naruto said with his mouth full before swallowing and said, "To answer your question, Haruno, yes, thanks to my bloodline I can move faster than probably anyone on the planet, but it gives me tunnel vision when I move as fast as I normally do. To counteract it, I use my huge chakra reserves to make a constant field that is moving away from me that I use sort of like echolocation to be aware of my surroundings. However, if I ever fight that way with a Hyuga or a Uchiha with their dojutsu active, it would effectively blind them for a while if not permanently since they can see chakra. So I have to work on not relying on the technique so much when I move. As for the training I myself did, I merely went against 5 clones and we fought as fast and hard as we could all night while we had joined the slipstream. Does that answer your questions?" Sakura nodded, then cocked her head and said, "Wait, what's the slipstream?" Sasuke's eyes narrowed, probably planning on somehow joining the slipstream that made Naruto so fast. Poor ignorant fool. Naruto smirked as he saw Sasuke's expression and said, "Sorry, Uchiha. This is one thing the council can't ever be coerced into handing over." Looking back to Sakura, who was beginning to glare at Naruto for the statement, he said, "The slipstream is the name my father gave our bloodline since it doesn't have an official name. Understandable considering he was the first one to find out about it, maybe even the first one to ever have it. It explains the sensation we feel whenever we focus on the feeling of extreme speed it gives us, hence the term joining the slipstream whenever we do." Naruto took a last couple of hurried bites before standing up and headed out of the kitchen without any sign of being tired, calling over his shoulder, "Give me a few minutes to get changed and we can head out to the bridge to Zuna. And Sai, don't think I'm going to go easy on you just because I had a training night. I swear I'm going to get you combat water walking by dinner time if it kills me." Everyone but Kakashi stared at him with slightly dropped jaws before Sakura turned back to Kakashi and asked, "Kakashi-sensei, how can he possibly be able to still move like that? He looked exhausted when he first came in." Kakashi chuckled and said, "That's Naruto for you. I've seen him train for 2 days straight, drop dead on his bed and then 3 hours later be right back at it again. He has chakra reserves that could make any Kage envy him and the stamina to match. He's going to make whoever he marries one happy woman in bed. Kakashi thought to himself, giggling, perversely drawing weird looks from everyone else that he waved away. Everyone's attention was brought to the stairs when they heard a shout from upstairs. "Uncle Kakashi, you aren't reading that crap you call literature in front of Inari, are you? You know he's only 10, right?" Kakashi's sweat dropped as he rubbed the back of his head, while Inari looked at him in confusion before saying, "Of course not. Why would you think that?" "Because I know you." Naruto deadpanned as he came down the stairs and walked over to the group and sat back down to finish his meal. Kakashi somehow teleported to the nearest corner with his back to the others and a storm cloud over his head. "He used to admire me. Where did that lovable kid who wanted to do everything like me go?" Kakashi asked as anime tears could be seen falling into a puddle. Naruto and the others' sweat dropped before he said, "He ran away screaming when you showed him those books of yours." The miniature storm cloud got even bigger and Kakashi said, "I was only trying to show you the greatness that was your godfather's work." Naruto snorted as he took a bite from his meal and said, "That's not greatness. That's a sad man's attempt at showing the world his perverted fantasies and a release to all men for their frustrations at never being able to have their bedroom fantasies come true." Everyone else's sweat drops grew bigger before Kakashi was suddenly beside Naruto and screaming in his ear, "Sacrilege! You take that back, you heathen!" Right before the back of Naruto's fist implanted in his face, causing him to slump to the floor with a pained grunt of "ow." Naruto looked down at his father's student while he dug his pinky into the ear that the silver-haired man had shouted into and said, "Face it, Uncle Kakashi. The only good book that he wrote was the first one. You know, the one with the main character that I'm named after, and probably the only book that doesn't have more smut than actual plot that he'll probably ever write." Kakashi's hand shakily rose from his face-down position as he said, "I reject your reality and substitute it with my own." Naruto snorted and said, "Whatever you say, Uncle Kakashi," before taking one last bite and stood up again to place the plate in the sink. Walking back around the table he said, "I'll have a clone waiting for you outside Tazuna. Sai, if you're not at the bridge in 10 minutes, I'm throwing your butt into the ocean along with a few kunai attached to some exploding notes." Right after he said that, Naruto disappeared, and it was only the sound of a clone coming into existence immediately after that informed them that Naruto was telling the truth. Tazuna shook his head and said, "That kid is really something else." Taking one last sip of his coffee, he stood up and said, "Come on, kid, we better get going." Sai simply nodded and stood up as well before the two walked out of the house together, accompanied by Naruto's clone. Scene change, Tazuna's bridge. Naruto reappeared to see what was to him a rather amusing sight. Most of Naruto's clones who were on guard duty the night before were standing in a line across the entrance of the bridge with Tazuna's workers behind them watching anxiously and a group of thugs in front of them. The supposed spokesperson and leader of the thugs looked as red in the face as a boiled lobster while most of the clones had grins on their faces. The clone directly opposite of the leader was brushing his nails over his shirt and looking for dirt. The leader of the thug glared at the clone as he did this and said, "Now you listen here, you brat. I don't care if the original you is here or not. Now step aside and let us through." And why would he do that when it's his job to keep people who are obviously not here to work on the bridge off of it? Naruto asked as he disappeared and then reappeared in front of his clones, surprising the man. The man and the other thugs quickly got over their shock and he said, "Are you the original?" Naruto looked at him like he was stupid and said, "No. I'm a water clone sent to shift the shadow clone guard, you moron." The bridge workers all laughed at this since Naruto had explained to them the differences between the clones he used and the other types of clones that ninjas often used. The thug's face reddened even more if that was possible, and he took a step as he said, "You will let us pass right now or else dash." He was unable to get any further as Naruto's fist made residence in his stomach as Naruto glared up at the man as he folded over the fist before taking a quick step back and kicking the man in his jaw so hard that he went flying before crashing into the trunk of a nearby tree, causing large cracks to form from the impact. The builders gave a cheer as the thugs looked on in shock. Naruto turned his glare onto the other thugs who instantly took a step back. Unleashing a bit of killing intent to further unnerve them, he pointed to the fallen man and said, "Get him out of here and don't come back." The men quickly nodded before one of them rushed over to their leader and dragged him away as the others broke out into a run. Sighing as he watched the men flee, Naruto dispelled the clones before making a fresh batch to help the workers. As he did, he spotted Tazuna and Sai with his clone walking down the path from his house. As Tazuna walked up and noticed the damaged tree, he said, What happened here? Naruto shrugged and said nothing much. Just showed some thugs why you don't want to mess with a jounin. Tazuna studied the blonde for another moment before shrugging, and went over to his workers who were talking excitedly about how Naruto had handled the situation. Naruto then noticed Sai staring at him intently and said, "What?" Sai cocked his head as he gave a false smile and said, "I'm just contemplating how I don't think I would want to fight you, Naruto-san." Naruto frowned at the formality and said, "Just call me Naruto-sai. And why would you have to fight me?" Sai made a motion of his shoulders that might have been intended to be a shrug and said, "You never know," before walking down to the water and stepped onto it, trying to get the hang of moving around on the liquid surface. Naruto and the clone traded looks before simultaneously rolling their eyes and heading to their respective charges for the day. 6. Battle on the bridge. The rest of the week passed quickly and quietly. Sai had mastered combat water walking to a point that he could spar with Naruto for about 30 minutes by the end of the week. Sakura had joined them 2 days after the day Naruto beat up the thug leader, when Kakashi judged her ready to learn the next exercise and be able to do it for more than 10 minutes at a time. She took to it just as fast as she did tree climbing, but had to constantly walk around the surface of the water to get her chakra reserves even higher. Sasuke had joined them a day before Sakura but was still the slowest at learning it, taking him until the end of the very last day to get up to combat level, making the emo even more broody than normal and giving Naruto headaches every time he demanded to be taught a jutsu or something instead. Now it was the night before they were expecting Zabuza to show up. Following Kakashi's advice, Tazuna had already told the workers to not show up the next day, and the genin were showing signs of nervousness and anxiety, while Sakura and Sasuke were. Sai looked as cool as he always did, but Naruto blamed that on the root training he had been given. After dinner, Naruto had taken Inari outside and the two were now sitting on a dock looking out across the water. As the two stared at the reflection of the moon with their knees to their chests, Naruto glanced over at Inari and reached into his kunai pouch. Handing the throwing knife to the kid who looked at him in curiosity, he said, "Here, use this if things get rough tomorrow. I'll leave some clones that should handle anyone who gets close, but it's always better to have a backup plan. Make sure you keep that on you at all times, all right?" Inari nodded and accepted the blade, staring at it for a minute before putting the blade in his pocket. As he stared out at the water again, he said, "Thanks, Naruto." Naruto rose an eyebrow and said, "For what, Inari?" Inari looked back at Naruto and said, "You were right. I've been nothing but a big baby ever since I lost Dad. But now I plan on changing that." Naruto smiled and ruffled the younger boy's hair and said, "I'm sure you will, Inari." Scene change. Next day, Tazuna's bridge. As the leaf Nin along with Tazuna came upon the bridge, they saw mist that was thicker than usual clinging to it, blocking their view of the end of the bridge. Naruto had already informed Kakashi that Zabuza had been in the area, and the older Nin had ordered Naruto to dispel the clones, so that way they could draw Zabuza out. "Looks like the party's about ready to start," Naruto said, earning a nod from Kakashi. Turning to his students, he said, "Don't leave Tazuna's side." Getting nods from the genin, the group began walking through the mist. Once they were halfway down the bridge, Naruto held up a hand, stopping everyone, and called out in a sing-song voice, "Oh, Zabuza, where are you? Come out. Come out wherever you are." As everyone besides Kakashi, who simply rose an eyebrow, stared at him, a dark chuckling echoed around the area before the mist died down a little, revealing two figures in the mist. "Why did you have to tell the bridge workers not to come today? I was looking forward to having some fun," said the tallest figure. Kakashi shrugged and said, "Sorry, but I think the workers preferred having all of their body parts remain connected to each other." Naruto, meanwhile, was staring at the smaller figure, who turned his head slightly so that it seemed that he was looking at him as well. Naruto pondered his options since he knew who the figure was and wasn't looking forward to fighting the guy. Coming to a decision, Naruto looked at his superior from the corner of his eye and said, "Uncle Kakashi, if I take his co-worker out of the equation, do you think you can hold Zabuza back for a short while without killing him?" Kakashi looked down at Naruto with confusion in his eye as he said, "Yes, but why would I do that?" "Because I plan on showing them that they're working for the wrong person," Naruto said as he continued staring at his newest acquaintance. "Oh, and how do you plan on doing that?" Kakashi asked with a raised eyebrow. Naruto turned his head to his fellow jounin and said, "We both have dealt with crime lords before, so you know that Gato's going to betray them so that he doesn't have to pay so much. I'm sure Zabuza's expecting the same thing, even if only a little." I just have to show his partner and confirm that fact. Once Zabuza knows that his employer is planning on betraying him, he won't fight anymore. Kakashi considered what the blonde said. On one hand, it could actually make Zabuza drop his mission. On the other hand, the man might not believe Naruto and just continue attacking. Either way though, Zabuza's partner would not be there to back the man up. Sighing, Kakashi nodded to Naruto, who closed his eyes and concentrated as he began opening the water gates to the dam that held back his chakra. As Zabuza felt the chakra presence in the younger Jounin rise, he growled out, "Haku! Get ready." "Yes, Zabuza-sama." No one was prepared though when Naruto's chakra presence spiked to unbelievable levels, causing a large and very visible pulse of chakra to expand from his body, pushing the mist away and revealing the blonde coated in a blue shell with his hair blowing around like he was in a wind that only blew around him. As everyone stared at him, an even larger pulse shot out from his body that headed inland, locating a large group of chakra presences that were nowhere near the level of a ninja that wasn't located near the village. Naruto opened his eyes and said, "I think I found the bastard. There's a large group headed this way." Kakashi nodded and said, "You've got 15 minutes. If you're not back by then, I'm taking him out." Naruto nodded, showing he understood before he took off running at low Jounin speeds toward the now visible pair of missing Nin. More specifically towards the fake hunter Nin. Said Nin stiffened in preparation before Naruto disappeared halfway to him. Less than an instant later, the masked figure vanished as well. "What the?" Zabuza exclaimed, trying to figure out what happened since his tool hadn't used his jutsu yet. Kakashi simply chuckled and said, "Don't worry. Naruto is simply taking him somewhere private so that we can have a rematch without interference from either side this time." Zabuza humphed at this and said, "It doesn't matter. I had planned on Haku fighting him anyway." "Well then, shall we get started?" Kakashi asked as he rose his headband, revealing his Sharingan eye. "Let's," Zabuza said as mist began building again. As the mist closed in, everyone heard Zabuza's disembodied voice saying, "This time will be much different, Kakashi." Scene change, Tezuna's house. The two clones stationed at the bridge builder's house felt the pulse shoot out from the original and both saw two figures heading their ways with swords strapped to their waists in the range that the sonar was usually used at. Frowning, one of the clones began walking toward the forest where the two swordsmen were and said, "I'll handle this." He was stopped by the other clone grabbing his shoulder. Turning to his comrade in confusion, the first saw the second look towards the house. "Let's see how he handles this. We can step in before it gets out of hand." The first clone considered for a moment before nodding. The two clones then went around the house to wait. 10 minutes later, Inari was helping his mother in the kitchen when they heard the sound of wood being sliced apart. Both of their eyes widened when the two swordsmen stepped into the kitchen. "Those are the men who killed Dad," Inari thought as a similar thought ran through Tsunami's head. "Heh, looky here, aren't you a cute one?" one of the swordsmen who was bald said. "Heh, I didn't know the old man had a grandson. Oh well, just one more thing I can cut up," the other one who was wearing a cap over his silver hair said, looking at Inari. Inari swallowed before he remembered what Naruto had told him that night at the table. Stepping in front of his mother, he pulled out the kunai Naruto had given to him and held it in a reverse grip like the blonde had told him, drawing raised eyebrows from the two swordsmen. "I'm not going to let you hurt my mom. You took my dad. I'm not letting you take her," Inari said with a lot more confidence than he felt. "Heh, look at this kid. He actually thinks he can stop us. Let's show him how wrong he is," the bald man said as both took a step forward and began to draw their blades. Their hands had only reached their hilts though when both felt cool metal against their throats. Inari and Tsunami's eyes widened when the two clones seemed to appear out of thin air behind the swordsmen with their kunai already out in reverse grips and in position. "Maybe he is not ready yet," the first clone started. "But he is on the right track," the second finished before looking at Inari and nodded. Inari returned the nod as he sighed in relief before the first clone said, "So you're the guys who killed Inari's father, huh? Normally we would just kill you and be done with it, but I think it would be better to let the villagers give you a trial and let them serve justice." Both swordsmen then fell unconscious due to the clones slamming the rings of their kunai against their foreheads faster than anyone could see. As the first clone began tying the two up, the second walked over to Inari and ruffled the kid's hair as he said, "Good job, Inari." "Thanks, Naruto," Inari said before looking down and said, But I was so scared. I really thought they were going to kill me before you appeared. The clone smiled and said, "It's all right to be scared, Inari. All humans are at one time or another. But like pain, it's what you do when you experience it that makes a difference. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It is when you overcome it. And today you took your first step in doing so. Now come on. We have to get these two to the proper authorities, and we don't want to leave you or your mom alone." Inari nodded as the first clone picked up the swordsman in fireman lifts and followed the others as they led the way to the village. Scene change. Gado's dock 30 seconds after second pulse. Haku suddenly reappeared stumbling in front of a dock that held a large boat that belonged to Gado. He shook his head from the disorienting effects of being grabbed and then rushed to another place so far away in almost as little time as the blink of an eye before the boy noticed where he was. Looking around at the dock, he thought, "What am I doing here? Better yet, where's Naruto?" He was brought out of his thoughts when he heard the sound of a lot of people moving on the path through the forest, making no attempt whatsoever to hide their passing. Turning around to look, he saw a bunch of people walking down the path with Gado at its head. The man sneered and said, "What are you doing here, brat? I would have thought you would have been with that wuss Zabuza. Oh well, this just makes things easier. Might as well start with him, boys." The crowd gave a cheer as they started advancing. Haku frowned behind his mask and said, "What is the meaning of this?" Gado laughed and said, "Isn't it obvious? I never planned on paying your baby of a master. It's much cheaper to hire these thugs to take you out once the job is done. Still, like I said, since you're here, we might as well get started. Consider this payback for breaking my arm, you brat." Haku stiffened and was about to reach for his sunbon needles when he heard a disembodied voice say, "Yeah, I don't think so," causing everyone to stiffen. A second later, all of the thugs suddenly all fell to the ground as if some grand puppet master had got tired of using all of them. Gado's eyes widened as he saw that each thug had a hole in the back of their head with blood slowly seeping out. Haku himself was sweating nervously behind his mask as he thought, "That could have been me and Zabuza-sama." Naruto suddenly appeared in front of the midget, scaring him even further as he grinned before leaning in and said, "Boo," in a dark voice. "Ah!" Gado yelled out in fear as he fell on his butt and did his best to get as far away from the blonde by crawling backwards with one of his arms in a cast. Naruto smirked at this and said, "You've been a bad boy, Gado, driving people to the brink of their existence just to satisfy your own greed. It's time for you to be judged." "No, please. I'll give you whatever you want. Money, women, land, whatever you want," Gado said in fear as he continued to crawl away from the blonde, who had begun taking small steps toward the crime lord while Haku merely stood watching. "Whatever I want," Naruto mused before saying, "All right, I'll let you live if you give me one thing." Gado's eyes showed his relief as he said, "Of course, whatever you want." Naruto's eyes hardened and he said, "I want you to bring back Inari's father and everyone else you killed." Gado's eyes widened even further than before. Just as he began stuttering a response to the demand, Naruto disappeared and Gado's head separated from his neck as Naruto reappeared behind the body with it in one hand and a kunai with wind swirling around in his other. Naruto spat at the body and said, "He got off easy in my opinion. Don't you think so, Haku?" Haku jerked and said, "You knew?" Naruto nodded and said, "Since I spotted you leaving Gado's base that day. Come on, let's go tell Zabuza that his contract is over." Haku nodded and Naruto disappeared. An instant later, Haku vanished without a trace as well, leaving only the dead bodies with blood pooling around them to give evidence of what happened. Scene change. Tazuna's bridge. Kakashi was staring at Zabuza, who was staring back at Kakashi as he was held in place by Kakashi's ninja dog summons. A short distance away, Tazuna and the genin were looking on, wondering why Kakashi wasn't finishing the job. "Why don't you just finish the job, Kakashi? I wouldn't have expected a man like you to be so hesitant to kill your opponent." Kakashi shrugged and said, "Just waiting for Naruto and your partner to get back." Zabuza's eyes narrowed as he said, "What do you mean?" Kakashi was saved from having to answer when everyone heard a voice say, "Dang, Uncle Kakashi. When I said hold Zabuza up for a little bit, I didn't mean literally." Everyone looked past the two figures where Naruto was standing beside Haku, who was shaking his head from the sensation of being transported so far so fast a second time. Everyone's eyes were then drawn to the head in his hand as it dripped some blood onto the bridge. Sakura's hand instantly went to her mouth as she tried to keep her breakfast down while Tazuna and Sasuke had similar problems but were handling it better. Sai merely raised an eyebrow at the sight. Zabuza's eyes widened as Naruto tossed the head to his feet and said, "Your contract's over, Zabuza. Good thing too in my opinion since Gato never planned to pay you." "He's speaking the truth, Zabuza-sama. I heard it from the man's mouth myself and he had a bunch of men coming to the bridge with him. He said he was going to betray us once the deed was done," Haku said as he took off his mask. "I see," Zabuza said as he sighed and then looked Kakashi in the eye and said, "Can you please get these damn mutts off of me?" Scene change, village center. That night, the whole village was in the village center celebrating their freedom. As some of the villagers sorted through everything Naruto and his clones had retrieved from Gato's base, the others were having a feast and dancing. Zabuza and Haku looked down from the roof of one of the stores. On either side were Kakashi and Naruto. "So what now, Zabuza?" Kakashi asked as he saw his students in the crowd. Sakura was fully enjoying the atmosphere while Sasuke watched the activities dispassionately while Sai was off to one side drawing. "Not sure. I guess it's back to the road for me," Zabuza said. "You could always join the Leaf. We could put in a good word with the Hokage," Naruto said as he watched the people below him. Zabuza shook his head and said, "He wouldn't allow it. Not if he doesn't want trouble from the Hidden Mist Village for harboring one of their missing nin. No, I'm afraid that life on the run is the only one I have in store for me now. Although I think I may hang around here for a while." Naruto frowned before Zabuza caught his attention as he said, "Kakashi, will you do something for me?" Kakashi glanced over at the man and said, "What is it?" "I want you to take Haku back to the Leaf with you. He's not an actual missing nin, so your Hokage should be able to let him in." Haku's eyes widened and he said, "Zabuza-sama?" Zabuza turned to the boy he secretly thought of as a son and said, "Listen to me, Haku. I don't want life on the run to be the only thing that defines your life. It'll be better for you if you had a place you can call home and not have to constantly worry about Hunter Nin." "But," Haku started before Zabuza held up a hand and said, "But nothing, kid. You've served me well. But now it's time for you to find your own dream." Haku began to tear up before Naruto put a hand on his shoulder, causing him to look at him as he said, "I'll make sure he's taken care of." Zabuza nodded and said, "Thanks, brat." Scene change, 3 days later. It didn't take long for the bridge to be completed now that all of the villagers could help without needing to fear for them and their family's safety. Once it was time for the Leaf Nin and Haku to head home. As the small group stood at the foot of the bridge with the village in front of them, Tazuna stepped forward and said, "Thank you for everything you've done for us." "It was our pleasure," Kakashi said as he shook the hand the bridge builder offered him. Zabuza then stepped forward and placed his hand on Haku's shoulder and said, "Grow strong, Haku." Haku nodded and said, "I will, Zabuza-sama." Naruto noticed Inari crying and stepped over to the boy and ruffled his hair. "I promised myself I wouldn't cry ever again," Inari said as he looked down. Naruto smiled and said, "It's alright to cry, Inari. Crying when someone says goodbye is just a way to show the bond you have with that person. Take good care of everybody, alright?" Inari nodded and Naruto rejoined his group as the rest said their goodbyes before turning around and began walking across the bridge. One of the villagers looked thoughtful and said, "By the way, what are we going to call the bridge?" Tazuna rubbed his chin in thought and said, "How about the Bridge of New Beginnings?" "Sounds good to me," Inari said, drawing agreement from the others. Forest treetops en route to the Hidden Leaf Village. Naruto shot through the trees beside Kakashi with Team 7 behind them. On Naruto's other side, Haku looked like he was on autopilot as he silently jumped from branch to branch. As the air whistled from the shinobi's passage, Naruto considered how he was going to watch over Haku when he joined the Leaf ranks like he promised Zabuza. The old man he wouldn't have a problem with. It was the council that Naruto was worried about. Knowing the civilian side and some of the shinobi members, they would most likely try to force Haku to form his own clan, and there was no way Naruto was going to let them push Haku around just so that they could get a bunch of ice-wielding shinobi in the future. He'd rather tell the entire Hidden Stone Village about his heritage than let a friend of his be manipulated like that. Naruto's face hardened into determination as he decided on what he would do. The civilians wanted a clan? Well, they would get one. A clan that was known to be as fierce as the whirlpools they lived near. It was time for Naruto to remind the Council of the alliance the village had made with his mother's homeland. Kakashi noticed Naruto's expression change out of the corner of his eye. Turning his head to the blonde, he said, "What is it, Naruto?" Naruto waited until he had shot off the next tree branch before saying, "You know they're going to try and force Haku to make a clan, right?" Haku jerked out of his thoughts at this while Kakashi nodded and said, "Yes, but I doubt Lord Hokage-sama will allow that." "Yeah, well, I'm not going to take any chances. I gave Zabuza my word that I would take care of Haku and I plan on keeping that promise," Naruto said. Haku smiled and thought, "Thank you, Naruto. I only hope I can stand by you when your time of need comes." Kakashi frowned and said, "What are you planning, Naruto?" Naruto's eyes gained a mischievous look as he grinned like the fox demon he contained as he said, "If the council tries anything, they will experience firsthand what made my clan so formidable." Sasuke and Sakura perked up in interest when they heard that Naruto actually came from a clan. "Naruto actually has a clan? But I thought he was an orphan," Sakura thought. "The dead last has a clan? Humph, no matter, it couldn't have been much of a clan if I've never heard of it," Sasuke thought with a frown. Kakashi frowned and said, "Be careful, Naruto. The council can make things incredibly difficult for you if you anger them." Naruto scoffed and said, "Like they haven't already tried to make my life a living hell as often as possible? Let them try. I'll send them on such a loop they'll be trying to make sense of things for a week afterwards, and I'm not talking about using my bloodline either. You reveal your status and they might force you into the CRA," Kakashi warned. Naruto snorted and said, "Let them try. Everyone seems to forget that little law is completely voluntary. Not even the Hokage could force someone into it even if he wanted to." Sasuke's eyes widened at this information since everyone had told him that he would be obligated to have more than one wife since he was the last loyal Uchiha. Hence a number of the more rabid fangirls trying to gang rape him every now and then so that he would have to marry all of them. Naruto smirked as he saw Sasuke's expression with his sonar technique that he had activated for just that purpose. Looking over his shoulder, he said, "So Uchiha, are you planning on being told to use the CRA? Probably be the only way the council could get little Uchihas since you seem to want everyone to think you're gay." "Oh boy," Kakashi thought as Sasuke saw red and launched himself with a war cry at a, in his opinion, way too annoying blonde to let live who was maniacally laughing as he easily avoided the enraged Uchiha and kept bouncing from tree branch to tree branch avoiding the kunai, shuriken, and even occasional fireball sent his way. Sakura was blushing both from embarrassment at one thing that Naruto had implied and anger at another as she shouted out to the two boys who were constantly moving ahead of the group. "Get him, Sasuke-kun. Make him suffer." Kakashi sighed and thought to himself, "I thought I asked him not to antagonize them." Haku's sweat dropped and thought, "How can someone be so mature one minute and then act like that in the next?" Sai merely raised an eyebrow and said, "I don't see what putting Dick Less through the CRA would accomplish. It wouldn't matter how many women marry him if he doesn't have the proper tools to make a clan." Kakashi's eye widened as he knew what was about to happen next as he looked back over his shoulder. Sure enough, Sakura's face had reddened even further as a dark aura surrounded her. "Sai!" Sakura ground out before launching herself at the boy who gained a fake smile and dodged the girl's charge much the same way as Naruto did with Sasuke as the two shot through the forest with the kunoichi, trying to kill the rude operative. Haku's sweat dropped again as Kakashi sighed. Turning to the scarecrow Jounin, he said, "I'm going to have to get used to this, aren't I?" "I'm afraid so. At least Naruto isn't a part of Team 7, so it shouldn't happen too often," Kakashi said as a particularly large fireball was seen exploding up ahead, followed by Naruto's laughter as he shouted, "Hey Sasuke, I think I felt a breeze that time," followed by Sasuke's roar of anger. Kakashi sighed again before saying, "Come on, we better catch up to them." "I'm not sure I actually want to," Haku said before the two increased their pace to be right behind the two pairs of attempted murderers and their tormentors. Scene change. Hidden Leaf Village main gate. It was just another boring day for Kotetsu and Izumo as they were once again assigned gate duty. That is until Naruto and Sai landed side by side and turned around just as a panting Sasuke and Sakura landed behind them. "You two enjoy your exercise?" Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow as Kakashi and Haku landed behind the exhausted pair of genin. "I'm going to kill you dead last." Slowly, painfully, Sasuke growled out, too exhausted to attack the blonde anymore. "You know, flat chest, I'm surprised you can actually be a ninja." I would have thought that an abnormal forehead such as yours would make getting to places quite a task. And Dickless seems to be missing more than just his tool. He had no stamina whatsoever. How he will survive in bed is beyond me. Sigh, when I get through with you, not even the tracking teams will be able to find you. There won't be anything left. Sakura growled out, also too tired to actually follow with her threat. Kakashi stepped forward and put a hand on each of the exhausted Genin's shoulders and said, Now, let's not fight now that we're home. Haku merely shook his head and thought, what have I gotten myself into? Naruto simply smirked before turning back around and walked over to the gate booth and signed the team in as he said, Team 7 and Jounin Naruto Uzumaki, returning from mission to wave with possible new recruit Haku Momochi. Haku's head turned so fast Kakashi actually heard it crack a little as he stared at the blonde in surprise. Zabuza asked that you take his name when you joined us, Kakashi said as Haku switched his attention to the scarecrow standing next to him. As Haku was trying to work out what he was feeling from that revelation, Naruto was enjoying a nice conversation with the Eternal Chunin as the two were often called. What did you say to make the kid so mad? Kotetsu asked as he glanced at the still panting Uchiha, who was currently trying to burn a hole into Naruto's back with his glare. Naruto smirked and said, not much really. Just said that the council forcing him to take part in the CRA was the only way they would get more Uchihas since he seems determined to make everyone think he was gay. The two guardsmen chuckled and Izumo said, and their other teammate? Naruto shrugged and said, well, I was already ahead of them when he got Haruno mad as well, but I think it was along the lines that no amount of women could make Uchiha's clan come back since he doesn't have the necessary tools. Then he just started insulting the both of them when the two caught up. The two chuckled again as they shook their heads and Izumo said, yep, that sounds like something Sai would say, all right? Naruto chuckled as well and said, yeah, I get the feeling that he doesn't really respect those two. That's putting it lightly. Sai seems to feel that if he doesn't insult those two at least 5 times a day each, then he has failed some personal mission of his, Kakashi said as he and Haku joined the three. Naruto smirked and said, sounds like a guy I wouldn't mind working with every now and then. Kakashi rose an eyebrow and said, even if he started insulting you? Naruto's smirk turned into a good-natured smile and he said, Uncle Kakashi, in my line of work, you have to learn how to honorably take as much as you give, and I've given a lot. Kakashi and the two Chunin chuckled and Izumo said, that's certainly true. I still remember that one time you gave all of the Nara's dear red glowing noses and placed blow-up Santa Clauses all over their clan grounds 3 years ago. Haku stared at Naruto as the blonde chuckled and said, yeah, that was fun. Well, we better get going. I'm sure the old man knows we're back already and probably wants our report as soon as possible. Kakashi nodded and turned back to his genin where Sai was taking advantage of the other two's exhausted states by being more insulting than usual. Okay, you three. Naruto and I are gonna go report to the Hokage, so you three have the rest of the day off. You guys also have the next few days off since you completed a C-rank mission. Be at our training ground in 3 days for more missions. As Sakura and Sasuke mumbled out their replies and Sai nodded, Naruto grabbed his 2 companions and disappeared. Scene change, Hokage's office. Sarutobi looked up from the scroll he was reading at his desk as he sensed Naruto's chakra in the room, the instant he appeared in his office with Haku and Kakashi shaking their heads trying to shake loose the cobwebs. Ugh, I hate it when you do that, Kakashi said as he gathered his bearings. Agreed, Haku said. Sarutobi rose an eyebrow and said, nice to have you back, you two. Now, as much as I'm interested in who this young man is, SOP demands that I hear out your report first, so could you please tell me how your mission went? The two Jounin nodded and Kakashi began giving their report with Naruto interjecting here and there where he was more involved. Once the report was finished, Sarutobi sighed and placed his arms on his desk and leaned forward to study Haku, who did his best not to fidget as he became nervous from the man's stare. So Zabuza asked you to bring his apprentice into our ranks? The two nodded and Sarutobi sighed again and said, if this was almost anyone else we were talking about, I wouldn't have a problem with it, but considering that man's history dash. Naruto stepped forward as the old man trailed off and said, Hokage-sama, what is the one thing that you said was my greatest strength? Sarutobi could tell how serious Naruto was about this, seeing as he had used his formal title, and as he focused on the blonde decided to be straight to the point as well and said, your ability to judge people. He sighed again before continuing, very well Naruto. I'll accept Haku into our ranks, but you will be held responsible for him. Am I understood? Naruto nodded and said, Crystal, sir. Sarutobi nodded as well and focused back on Haku and said, Now then, Haku, if you're going to be joining the ranks of my ninja, I need to know just what exactly you can do. Haku nodded and said, I have a bloodline that allows me to naturally mix wind and water nature chakra into ice nature chakra. I know various D to be ranked water jutsu, although I primarily use ice jutsu. My strongest jutsu is one that surrounds my opponents with a dome of ice mirrors that I can travel through at speeds that are the faster than most high-level jounin. I am highly accurate with Senbon needle and have a vast knowledge of medical first aid and how to use herbs effectively in making medicine. I see. Well, it's nice knowing that I'll have another shinobi who can help out in the field if his comrades are injured, but you having a bloodline may prove to be a bit of a problem in the near future. Sarutobi said as he felt a headache coming. You mean the council most likely trying to make me form a clan? Haku said. Sarutobi nodded, knowing that Naruto was most likely the one to let the boy know. Before he could say anything, Blonde said, Hokage-sama, as clan heir of the Uzumaki clan, I am recommending Haku Momochi to be placed under clan guardianship. Sarutobi's eyes snapped over to the blonde in surprise as he said, Naruto, we've discussed what announcing your status would cause. Naruto nodded and said, I know that it will only give me more grief from the council, old man, but I am not going to let them turn Haku into breeding stock. Even the Uchiha doesn't deserve that fate. And if they try to throw that CRA on me when I tell them, then I'll just shove it right up their butts. I've taken a lot from those guys, but this is one thing I will fight for. Everyone heard the determination in Naruto's voice, and Sarutobi saw fire in the blonde's eyes that he hadn't seen since he had told Naruto about his parents that night 7 years ago. Sarutobi grinned. If the council tried anything, Naruto would give them such a headache they wouldn't be able to look at anything shinobi-related for a month. Very well, Naruto. As of this moment, Haku Momochi is currently under the protection of the Uzumaki clan. All decisions that affect him must be brought to you before any measures are taken. As such, it falls upon you to make sure his needs are taken care of. I will also be making him your partner on missions. Do you find this acceptable? Naruto nodded and said, I do. Sarutobi nodded as well and said, Very well then. Bringing his focus to Kakashi, he said, I'm afraid that this will have to be a private conversation from now on, Kakashi. You're dismissed. Kakashi nodded and turned to walk out of the door. After the door closed, Sarutobi focused back on Naruto and said, Now then, if you're going to make this official, even if it's just with the council, there are a few things we must go over. For starters, am I to assume that you want me to still vote for your clan if you are unable to attend a council meeting? Naruto closed the door to the Hokage's office as Haku massaged his temples. Are all things related to politics like that? Haku asked as the two began walking out. Nah, some are worse, Naruto said lightly as he nodded to Mrs. Reina's, who returned it with a small smile before going back to her own work. As the two began walking through the hall that led to the main stairwell, Haku glanced over at Naruto before focusing back in front of him as he said, Thanks for everything. Naruto smiled and said, Don't mention it, Haku. You're my friend, and I make it a point of making sure nothing happens to my friends if I can do anything about it. Now come on, we've got a tour to go on, and then I'll show you where your apartment will be. Haku looked confused and said, But the Hokage didn't say where I would be staying. Naruto grinned and said, Because he didn't have to, and I quote, It falls upon you to make sure his needs are taken care of. That includes where you'll be living. Luckily, the apartment that's next door to mine is empty. I'm sure Mr. Adragas won't mind you moving in. He and the rest of my neighbors are fairly agreeable people. Haku nodded and said, I'm glad. Some of the people Zabuza-sama and I had to room with over the years weren't the best of neighbors at times. Naruto chuckled and said, I bet. But I'm pretty certain that as long as you aren't shaking the building with any loud music, these neighbors will be a lot more friendly with you. Haku smiled and said, I'm sure they will be too. So where are we going first? Naruto smiled and said, Well, I don't know about you, but I'm hungry, so I was thinking of showing you my favorite restaurant first. Haku nodded and said, Sounds good. Scene change, the next day. Naruto hated being right, especially when it came to the council. Right now he was standing in front of them with Haku standing by his side ready to give the council hell as they glared at him while he smirked at what he had planned. It was too bad. Naruto was looking forward to the day's activities that he had planned. Flashback. Naruto was in Haku's apartment as he made breakfast for his new teammate while said ice user was sitting at his table. "You don't have to do this, you know," Haku said. "Think of it as a housewarming gift. Besides, I need to know that you are well fed for what I have planned for us today." "What you have planned?" Haku asked. "Yeah," Naruto said as he turned off the oven and brought over the bacon and eggs that he had made and placed it next to the toast as he continued. "I want to see just what exactly you can do, especially with this ice mirror trick of yours. Well, that, and I think we could teach each other a few things as well since you and me actually share the same elemental affinities. The only real difference between us is that while you mainly use your water element, I'm more of a wind type. With any luck, we could teach each other how to use our secondary affinities better." Haku nodded and said, "I think that would be extremely beneficial to both of us." Naruto nodded as he sat down and the two began eating. 10 minutes later, the two boys were cleaning the dishes. They heard someone knocking on the door. Naruto and Haku traded glances and Naruto said, "I told you we would be called on sooner or later." Scene change, council chambers. As Naruto and Haku approached the doors to the council chambers, Naruto said, "Unless I say otherwise, let me do all the talking. There's a certain way you have to handle the civilians if you want to come out of any council meeting with your sanity fully intact." Haku nodded and said, "Understood. Am I to assume that I should pay attention to how you handle these civilians for future reference?" Naruto smiled at Haku as he placed one hand on the door handle said, "You would be correct. Now watch and learn." And with that, Naruto swung open the door causing it to bang against the wall as he strode in with a confident air and said, "All right people, let's get this meeting between clowns and those who actually do something meaningful with their lives over with." Haku stared at Naruto as he joined the smirking blonde who was standing next to the Hokage, who along with the other shinobi in the room were either smirking at Naruto's statement or at least showed amusement in their eyes. The civilians on the other hand were glaring holes at Naruto, but who cares about them anyway? Well then, now that everyone is here, we can get this meeting underway. For those that don't know, we were discussing the possibilities of Haku Momochi being eligible for the CRA. Sarutobi said as he mentally chuckled at the civilians who were still glaring at one of his favorite jounin. "Now hold on," one of the civilians said as he stood up and pointed an accusing finger at the blonde. "What is the brat doing here? This doesn't concern him at all." "Oh, but it does," Naruto said. "You see, as clan heir of the Uzumaki clan, I have brought Haku under clan protection. Therefore, any decisions that affect him must be brought to my attention before anything can be finalized." "What?" The shinobi in the room all dug their pinkies in at least one of their ears as all of the civilians shouted out at once. "What idiocy are you talking about, you brat? You don't have a clan," one particularly nasty civilian asked. Naruto snorted and said, "So am I to assume that the spiral on not only this village's Chunin and Jounin vests but also in our very own village symbol is the mark of some other clan, that this village has an alliance with other than the Uzumakis from the hidden whirlpool village that my mother was a part of? Or have you guys forgotten that it was the Uzumakis, including me, that have kept the Kyuubi from wiping this village off the face of the earth for 3 generations? Or could it be that you have forgotten what the Uzumaki clan status was in this village? Need I remind you that my great-grandaunt, Mito Uzumaki, was the wife of the first Hokage? I know Naruto is somehow related to her, but I don't know the actual lineage." Haku's eyes widened as the implications of what Naruto just said settled in her mind. Meanwhile, the civilians and even some of the shinobi's eyes had also widened and most of them were stuttering. Naruto decided to build on his momentum and said, "You people seem to forget that I was chosen to be the prison of the Kyuubi for a reason. We Uzumakis are the only ones who can without a doubt fully contain and control a biju once it is sealed inside of us. And yet you constantly mix me up with the damn fox and do your best to make my life a living hell. Well, I draw the line when you mess with people that are my friends and under my protection. You want a clan? Well, you got one now. As of this moment, I declare the Uzumaki clan to be properly secured and am reclaiming my council seat." The civilians erupted into shouting as the shinobi side all leaned back in their chairs and shook their heads. Most of them had known something would cause Naruto to snap for a while now. After all, a person can only take so much, and the Uzumakis were known for being fierce warriors. Add the fact that they were just as fiercely loyal to those they called friends, and you had someone who was going to most likely make the civilians' lives hell from this period on. "Am I to assume that you agree to partake in the Clan Restoration Act, Uzumaki?" Danzo asked from his seat, drawing everyone's attention again. "Hell no," Naruto said. You guys seem to have also forgotten that that thing is completely voluntary. There is no way I'm going to allow anyone to chain me down in some political marriage, and in my opinion anyone else that does is certifiably insane. I refuse to let myself or anyone else that I care about to become some glorified breeding stock for someone who just wants to increase their standing. Now if you'll excuse me, I have more important things to do than waste my time dealing with you. So can we please go? Before the civilians could sputter out a response, Sarutobi said, "Meeting adjourned." "Thank you," Naruto said as he nodded to the old man before he and Haku disappeared. Scene change, Hokage Monument. Naruto and Haku reappeared in the blonde's training ground. Shaking his head, Naruto said, "This is why I hate politics. Everyone is scrabbling to get the bigger bone and get such big heads that it's a wonder their backs don't snap from the weight." "That was very interesting how you handled that situation, Naruto-sama," Haku said as he once again tried to get over the effects of being transported so far and fast under someone else's power. "Yeah, well, hopefully we won't have to deal with them again for a few more days. And what have I told you about being so formal with me? Just Naruto is fine," Naruto said as he began walking further into the training ground. As Haku fell into step with his partner, he asked, "Was it true what you said back there? Do you really contain the Kyuubi and are related to the first Hokage's wife?" "Yep," Naruto said. "Now come on, I want to see how fast you can actually go in that mirror house jutsu of yours." As the feathers began falling, Naruto rose his right hand and purple flames appeared on his fingertips before he disappeared. Gaara's eyes widened as he folded over the blonde's hand and lost consciousness. As he did, enemy Nin dropped their disguises only to be brought down by Senbon needles thrown by a figure who darted through mirrors that had appeared all around the arena in an instant. "Gaara!" Temari yelled out in fear for her brother as she and Kankoru rushed towards the two. Naruto took out 2 kunai from his pouch and sent them spinning end over end at the two. The 2 kunai missed them by the barest of margins before swinging around the 2 sand shinobi and wrapping them in the chakra strings that had been connected to their middles. Naruto made a fist and yanked on the strings, sending the 2 flying before suddenly stopping as Naruto intercepted their flight paths with half-fisted hands in their stomachs, knocking the 2 out as well. Naruto then spun and thrust out his arm, sending a huge blast of wind out, slamming into the Sand Trio's Jounin sensei, who had tried to sneak up on the blonde. The man shot across the arena and impacted the far wall before falling over unconscious. Naruto turned his head to Sasuke, who had stood frozen during all this, and said, "Oi, Uchiha, get your act together and go meet up with Uncle Kakashi." Sasuke shook his head before jumping up into the arena seating to find his Jounin sensei. Scene change, village wall. 3 large clouds of smoke suddenly appeared in the forest outside of the forest as war cries sounded. The clone that faced the left and right snakes both took out a vial that contained blood and poured the contents onto their palms before taking out a pill and popping it into their mouths. The 2 then jumped off the wall while they ran through hand signs. As cries of summoning jutsu rang out, 2 more large clouds of smoke appeared before dispersing and revealing the blondes standing on top of 2 of the big 3. As the 2 clones looked across the distance to each other, they pulled out kunai and held them in a reverse grip and nodded to each other before disappearing into the forest. Scene change, roof over Kage's eating box. Orochimaru and Sarutobi were staring each other down as they were surrounded by a purple box barrier. "Ku. Oh, how I've waited for this day. Soon you'll be dead, sensei, and the Leaf Village shall burn." Sarutobi smirked and said, "There's just one problem with that plan of yours, Orochimaru." Orochimaru cocked his head and gained a creepy smile as he said, "Oh, and what's that, sensei?" Sarutobi's smirk turned evil as he said, "I'm not your sensei," before being covered in smoke, revealing Naruto. "What?" Orochimaru shouted out. "But if you're here, then where is he?" Naruto smirked as he took off his coat, revealing a sleeveless shirt, and said, "Right where he needs to be, leading his people. You see, Orochimaru, the Hokage decided that his time would be better spent elsewhere, so he had me take his place. You should feel honored. You'll be the first person see me earn my name of the Flash Fire." Right after Naruto finished speaking, the sound of fingers snapping sounded as Naruto shot his right arm to the side, and it became coated in fire. Orochimaru's eyes narrowed dangerously before his sick smile returned, and he said, "You are 30 years too young to be trying to go against me, you brat. Still, you should provide some entertainment, I suppose. I was planning on having Kabuto summon her when he fought you, but I think I prefer summoning her alongside the others." Naruto's eyes narrowed and he said, What nonsense are you talking about, you snake? Orochimaru's grin became even sicker as he ran through hand signs and called out, "Forbidden art. Impure world resurrection." Naruto's eyebrow rose as 4 caskets rose from a black portal. The caskets' lids then opened, revealing their contents, and Naruto's eyes widened before narrowing as he growled out, "You bastard." The week following Naruto's declaration of his claiming clan heir status had gone by rather quickly for him and his partner. After Naruto had run Haku to the ground in a fight that was no holds barred on Haku's part, figuring out just what the boy could do, he decided that if they were going to be teammates, then he had to get the ice user's speed closer to what his was. Naruto's plan for that had 2 main parts to it. The first was to have him use gravity weights to increase his general speed over time. The second part was for him to become able to use his mirrors for a lot longer and modify it to cover longer distances than just the dome that the original jutsu made. Only problem was that the jutsu took up a ton of Haku's chakra reserves. To solve that problem, Naruto had Haku use his jutsu as often as possible and also decided to teach Haku the shadow clone jutsu. While Haku could only make 1 clone and still be able to do anything, it would still help him increase his reserves. It also allowed Naruto to teach Haku more than one thing at a time, or vice versa when it came to Haku teaching him how to use water-natured chakra. By the end of the week, both boys now had a C-rank jutsu for their secondary affinities, and Haku was able to go both longer and farther in his mirrors. Now the two were testing just how fast and long Haku could travel through the mirrors by doing laps around the top of the mountain. As they were coming up on their training site, Naruto spotted an Umbu standing next to the 3 logs. As Haku appeared in a mirror and jumped out, he said, "Umbu in the training ground. Let's see what he needs." Haku nodded and the two shifted their course to land in front of the Umbu. Once they landed, the Umbu spoke short and to the point. "Uzumaki-san, the Hokage wishes to speak to you and your partner." As soon as Naruto nodded, the Umbu disappeared in a sunshine. Naruto glanced over at Haku, who simply sighed before the blonde disappeared, with Haku vanishing as well an instant later. Scene change, Hokage's office. Sarutobi looked up from the book he had been reading while his shadow clone worked on paperwork as he sensed the 2 boys appearing in his office. Haku shook his head as he usually did, but didn't say anything since Naruto had told him that he was going to have to get used to those speeds if they were going to be partners. He was getting better at it, but it still disoriented him a little. "You wanted to see us, old man?" Naruto asked, ignoring the double at the desk with ease that came from working with clones for so long. The original Hokage nodded and said, "I did," before closing his book after putting a bookmark in, and stood up from his couch to walk over to the desk where the clone handed him a scroll. Walking back to Naruto and handing him the scroll, he said, "I just assigned Team 8 their first C rank. It's just a standard bandit raid for a village 2 days out, but due to what happened on Team 7's mission, I've decided that whenever possible I should have someone of at least Chunin rank to accompany rookie Genin teams when they go on C rank missions. I believe that the speed you 2 possess should be enough to prevent anything untold from happening during their raid. Team 8 will be expecting you at the gate in 30 minutes. Naruto nodded as he opened the scroll and read through the contents briefly before rolling it back up and said, "Understood. We'll be there." Scene change, village main gate. Team 8 was leaning against the gate as they waited for the 2-man team that would be accompanying them. Kiba humphed and said, "I still don't think that we don't need these guys. We don't need babysitters." Kurenai sighed and said, "I told you, Kiba, after what happened to Team 7, the Hokage doesn't want to take any more chances with our less experienced Genin." Kiba frowned and said, "So they ran into a little bit of trouble, so what? Doesn't mean that we will." Hinata and Kurenai both frowned before Shino said, "Even if that is true, it is better to be prepared in case things do go wrong, which, considering our mission, is more likely than other possible C ranks we could have been assigned. I'd listen to your teammate if I were you, Inuzuka. You never know when things could spiral out of control." Team 8 glanced over to where the voice came from and saw Naruto with someone they had never seen before walking towards them. Hinata instantly saddened, thinking that Naruto had found someone else besides her. As Naruto and Haku joined them, Naruto nodded to Kurenai and said, "Kurenai, it's good to be working with you again." "Likewise, Uzumaki," Kurenai said with a small smile. She then glanced over at Haku and Naruto followed her gaze before saying, "Oh, where are my manners? Allow me to introduce Haku Momochi, my partner. Haku, this is Kurenai Yuhi, the Hidden Leaf's resident Genjutsu mistress, and her team, Hinata Hyuga, Shino Aburame, and Kiba Inuzuka." Shino and Hinata gave nods when introduced, which Haku returned. Kiba, of course, decided to try and flirt with Haku in his unrefined way. Walking over to Haku, he said, "Hey there, want to get something to eat after the mission?" Naruto shook his head and said, "Inuzuka, you do realize that Haku is a boy, right?" Kiba's eyes widened as Haku chuckled. Kiba opened his mouth to say something, but only sputtering came out. Hinata let out a small sigh of relief, which Shino caught but didn't comment on. Kurenai meanwhile was frowning and said, "Momochi, you wouldn't be related to Zabuza Momochi, would you?" Haku shook his head and said, "Not by blood. But I was his apprentice before he requested Naruto-san and Kakashi-san to take me back to the Leaf when they finished their mission in Wave. He requested that I take his last name when I joined the Leaf." Kurenai nodded and said, "I see. Well, now that introductions are over with, I believe we should be going." Naruto and Haku nodded and Naruto said, "Agreed." Turning to the genin, he said, "Don't worry, Inuzuka. You won't even notice we're there once the fighting starts unless you guys get in trouble." Kiba glared at the perceived insult, but the other two simply nodded before Kurenai took off into the trees with the others right after her. Scene change. Next day, en route to Client Village. Kurenai was once again in the lead position as her team followed with Naruto and Haku on either side, and a little behind the genin as they traveled in a standard V formation with Kiba and Akamaru at the point and Shino and Hinata behind him. As he landed on a branch and shot off, Naruto sent out a light chakra pulse like he usually did when traveling at slower speeds and noticed Hinata's Byakugan active again. Naruto shook his head and thought, "She's been activating that thing near constantly now. She's lucky I've been limiting how strong my pulses are, or I would have blinded her the first time she did." Naruto waited until both he and Hinata were once again in the air and said, "Something the matter, Hinata?" Hinata flinched before looking over her shoulder at the blonde and said, "And no. What makes you think something's the matter?" "Because you keep on using your Byakugan. So what's wrong?" Naruto asked. "And nothing. I just don't want to be caught by surprise in case we run into an ambush," Hinata said with a small blush growing on her face. Kurenai meanwhile had a small smile while Kiba was frowning. Naruto rose an eyebrow and said, "If you say so, although I'm pretty sure that we don't have to worry about that just yet. Tell you what, turn off your Byakugan for a minute and I'll do a full scan on the area we're in." No, he's not completely oblivious like Kanon, he's just giving her a way out. Hinata slowly nodded and turned off her Byakugan as she looked back forward as Naruto gathered his chakra for a moment before sending it out in a visible pulse that would travel further than a normal chakra pulse. After a minute of letting the pulse turn into a steady field and doing a thorough scan of the area, Naruto let the chakra dissipate into the air and said, "All clear. Nothing in a 100-yard circle except for some forest animals." Hinata nodded without looking back and thought, "Now what do I do?" 5 minutes later, Hinata had finally gathered enough courage to say, Naruto? HM? What is it, Hinata?" Naruto asked as he focused on the girl again. "WL, I wanted to say thank you for the advice you gave me back at graduation. It really helped." Naruto smiled and said, "Don't mention it, Hinata, and my offer from then still stands as well. You ever need any help with anything, just come to me and I'll help any way I can." Hinata nodded as well as a small blush made its way across her face. Luckily for Hinata, Naruto was behind her and didn't see it. Scene change. Forest just outside of Client Village. The meeting with the village's mayor had gone fairly smoothly. He had told the shinobi that the bandit raids had always come from the east. Unfortunately, the bandits would sometimes kidnap some of the women, so there was the possibility of there being a hostage situation, which made Naruto a bit nervous. In the past, whenever Naruto did a bandit raid, it was over nearly before it began, since Naruto would use his bloodline to take all of the bandits out at once, not giving them a chance to even recognize they were under attack, which meant they couldn't try and play the hostage game with the blonde. But this wasn't Naruto's mission to complete, it was the genin of teammates. He, Haku, and even Kurenai were simply there to supervise and step in if things got too far out of control. And unfortunately, those three were doing this sort of thing the first time. Naruto glanced at the three who were studying tracks from the most recent bandit raid and figuring out where they needed to go. From what he could tell, they were doing a good job figuring out how many bandits there were and how many people were taken. He just hoped they would do just as well when under pressure. Haku stepped over to his side and said, "They seem to know what they are doing." Naruto smirked and said, "They're a tracking team. I would sure hope they could find traces of a bunch of bandits passing through. Haku nodded and said, I would hope so too. Haku then noticed that Naruto's gaze was more on Hinata than the other two. Is there something going on between you and Hinata-san? Naruto blinked before turning to Haku and said, What gives you that idea? Haku rose an eyebrow and said, You seem to get along with her better than the other two genin. Naruto snorted and said, That's not very hard. She was the only one to actually treat me like a human being when I was undercover to draw out that damn traitor Mizuki. Don't get me wrong. Aburame over there never picked on me or anything, but he was still indifferent. I see, Haku said as he glanced back towards the genin, who began walking with Kurenai falling in behind them. As the two boys fell in as well, he said, So there is nothing between you whatsoever? Naruto took a quick glance at his partner before looking forward and said, Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I know she has a crush on me, but truth be told, I don't know if I'd ever like her that way. Well, I guess only time will tell, Haku said, and Naruto nodded before Kiba said, I've got a scent that's going the same way. We should be able to follow it straight to the camp. Kurenai nodded and said, Good. Lead the way. Let's try not to walk right on top of them before we have a proper plan though. The genin nodded before Kiba took point again and began running at a moderate speed with the others following. Scene change, 100 yards from bandit camp. The Leaf Shinobi were about 100 yards away from the bandit camp, hiding in the trees to avoid any patrols as Hinata did reconnaissance with her Byakugan. I see the camp. There's 15 bandits. They've got their tents in a circle with a fire in the middle. There's a few in the tents sleeping, but most are around the fire eating. There's a cage holding 10 women in the biggest tent. One of the bandits is guarding them, but he is currently sleeping. Kurenai nodded and said, Any bandits patrolling? Hinata shook her head and Naruto raised an eyebrow and said, That's weird. Either they're sure that no one can find this camp of theirs, or they're just plain stupid. Most likely a combination of the two, Kurenai said before turning to her students and said, Kiba and Shino, I want you two to focus on the bandits while Hinata releases the prisoners. Shino, I'm going to need you to send your insects out first to drain them as much as possible. Have them do it as discreetly as they can. The longer they don't know what's happening, the better. Kiba, 5 minutes after they start, I want you and Akamaru to tear through them with your Fong over Fong attack. Make sure you get as many as possible in your first sweep. Hinata, I want you to slip into that tent and take care of the guard and slip the prisoners out the back and bring them to me before Kiba attacks. Once the prisoners are safe, I want you to go back and give Kiba and Shino any backup support they may need. If things get rough, the rest of us will give you a hand with long-range support. Does everyone understand? The 3 genin nodded and the group began to prepare. Time skipped 10 minutes later. Naruto looked on from his spot in the trees as he saw Shino's bugs moving along the ground like a black living carpet as they headed to the ring of tents. Once the insects reached the tents, they began spreading out with some slipping into the tents themselves to feed off of the sleeping bandits. The rest encircled the camp before heading inwards in small groups that gave everyone a hard time spotting them if they didn't know what to look for. Meanwhile, the bandits that were around the campfire were having a jolly good time as they ate their meals unaware of the approaching threat. Naruto frowned. The plan was going smoothly so far, but something was nagging the blonde at the back of his mind. Something wasn't right, and not knowing what it was driving the blonde crazy. Reaching to the radio that was clipped to his ear, he set it from standby receive to send and receive. Naruto took another glance into the camp before tapping his mic and said, Haku, do you copy? There was a short pause before Naruto heard, I copy Naruto-san. Is something wrong? I don't know. I just have this feeling that something is wrong. You see anything unusual on your end? Negative, Naruto-san. There is nothing on my end, Haku said. This is Kurenai. I don't see anything unusual on my end either. Keep an eye open though. I don't want to be taken by surprise. Understood, Haku said. Roger that, Naruto said. The 3 vets then watched as twin spinning drills burst out of the woods from 2 different directions and tore through a tent each on their way into the circle and began tearing apart the bandits who could only stand before suddenly falling over from having their chakra eaten. The fight, if you could call it that, was over in minutes. Now none of the tents were left standing and the bandits were all sprawled out on the ground, either already dead or bleeding out from the cuts Kiba and Akamaru had given them. Said genin was currently being given the first kill talk by Kurenai while Naruto and Haku finished off the survivors. Hinata and Shino meanwhile were doing their best to not look at the two vets as they sealed everything the bandits had stolen into sealing scrolls. Fortunately, Naruto had already created clones to lead the women back to their village, so they were spared from having to see one of the dark sides of the shinobi world. 5 minutes later, the group was getting ready to follow Naruto's clones when the hairs on said blonde's neck rose. Naruto frowned at the tingling sensation he was getting and said, "Hinata, whatever you do, don't activate your Byakugan unless I say otherwise." Hinata looked confused but nodded and said, All right, Naruto." As Kurenai and Haku started looking around trying to figure out what had Naruto on edge, Naruto began pulsing his chakra out before turning to the trees behind him and said, "All right, come on out. I already know you're there." Someone chuckled before the leaf Nin heard a voice say, "Heh, good job. Most people don't sense me until I'm right on top of them, if ever." They then saw a man who was about 6'2" with spiky red hair that reached just past his shoulders and blue eyes that were just a shade darker than Naruto's walk out of the trees. He wore a shinobi's typical clothing and had a katana strapped to his back with the hilt over his left shoulder. Tied to his forehead was a shinobi headband with a spiral symbol on it. Well, when I heard that the village nearby was having bandit troubles, I decided to help them out. Imagine my surprise when I find Leaf Shinobi already taking care of the problem. This must be my lucky day since I've finally found someone from the Leaf who could possibly give me a challenge. I don't usually bother asking my enemies this since they're usually dead before they can make me break a sweat. But since you were able to sense me, I think I'd like to know my opponent's name," the man said as he pulled his sword out of his scabbard. Naruto frowned and said, "It is customary to give your own name first when asking another for theirs, but my name is Naruto Uzumaki. Mind telling me why you believe we are enemies?" The man's eyes widened when he heard Naruto's last name and he said, "Uzumaki? But you're just a kid. Still, that means there must have been other survivors." The man then narrowed his eyes and said, "Oh, where are my manners? You want to know my name? My name is Kuroda Uzumaki, elite jounin of the hidden Whirlpool Village. It's kind of ironic. I had been looking for survivors for so long, but when I finally find someone whose parents were survivors, they end up under the banner of the enemy." Naruto's eyes widened as well and he said, "You're an Uzumaki as well? But I thought everyone but my mother was killed when the hidden stone attacked them in the last war." "Wait a minute, what do you mean under the banner of the enemy? The Hidden Leaf and Whirlpool villages were allies." Kuroda scowled and said, "Allies? Ha, don't make me laugh. The Hidden Leaf wasn't our ally. It betrayed us. When we were attacked by the stone, they only sent 2 genin teams, too. How the hell could 2 teams comprised mainly of genin of all things make a difference? They couldn't. We were obviously not worth the Leaf sending any real help. They were the only ones close enough to reach you in time." Naruto shouted at the man while everyone else was doing their best to figure out what was happening. "Man, what's going on between these two? I mean, aren't they related?" Kiba asked while the others simply shook their heads, showing their own confusion. "Oh, and how would you know that? You weren't there. You weren't even born yet," Kuroda shouted right back at the blonde. Naruto narrowed his eyes and said, "Because I've read the reports of not only my father but also my mother's. And they clearly said that the Leaf was sending backup but it didn't reach the village in time. The Hidden Leaf Village sent 3 platoons to the Whirlpool once they received the message for help. 3 platoons that could have been used elsewhere at the time. My mother had joined them since she wanted to help defend her homeland. But when they got there, all that was left were ruins. The 2 Leaf teams that had been sent were severely injured and were found hiding in an abandoned dock warehouse with about 20 survivors who were even more injured. The medics that the platoons had with them did all they could, but none of the survivors made it during the journey back to the Leaf. We did everything we could." "Yeah. Well, it obviously wasn't good enough, was it?" Kuroda growled out before saying, "I should have known someone born in that village would side with it. But I cannot believe that Kushina would side with them over her homeland." Seeing Naruto's eyes widen again, Kuroda chuckled and said, "Yeah, I know who your parents were. Not very hard seeing as how Kushina was the only Uzumaki in the Leaf Village at the time. And you look more like that Namikaze fellow that had been at the village at the time than an Uzumaki. What was his name again? Oh yeah, Minato. Minato Namikaze." Kurenai's eyes widened when she heard that, but a quick glance from Naruto kept her from saying anything. Focusing back on Kuroda again, he said, "My mother chose to stay in the Leaf because we were allies. We were still at war with the Hidden Stone and Cloud villages, which you conveniently won just 2 months after our destruction. I find it odd that your father was able to complete his jutsu just after Whirlpool was destroyed, Kuroda shouted out. Naruto's eyes hardened as he said, Are you saying that the leaf wanted the Whirlpool to be destroyed? Well, it sure looks that way from where I'm standing. Kuroda growled out before his hair began fluttering around like it was caught in a breeze of wind, and everyone began feeling the sensation of being in the middle of an ocean during a storm. As everyone besides Naruto started lightly shivering at the Uzumaki's presence, Kuroda said in a dangerous tone, But it seems that talking will get us nowhere. You have decided to stand by the leaf, and so you are just as much my enemy as any other ninja from the leaf or stone. Naruto frowned before he began matching his distant relative's presence with his own, and then swallowed it in his own, making everyone's eyes widen as they suddenly felt like the ocean they were in was suddenly in the middle of a massive maelstrom 5 times worse than before, with 50-foot waves crashing down around them. Naruto's hair began swaying all over the place like he was caught in a cyclone as the two Uzumakis began glaring at each other, waiting for the other to make the first move. What's this sensation? Hinata asked as she began to shiver uncontrollably. Kurenai opened her mouth to answer, but Haku beat her to it. Everyone has a presence that is hidden deep down in you that defines you. There are those who can bring that presence out in order to intimidate their foes better than any kind of killing intent. Zabuza-sama was one of those able to do it. It had felt like you were being stalked by some unknown predator, but it was nowhere near this level. By the looks of things, their presences are strong enough to even physically manifest themselves a little. Before Haku could say anything else, Naruto disappeared just as a shell of what the others could only assume was chakra that was multicolored appeared before Kuroda's sword arm moved at impossible speeds to his side and met the kunai that Naruto was holding in a clang. Naruto's eyes momentarily widened before he just barely blocked Kuroda's free arm as he tried to backhand the blonde. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he disappeared and reappeared in front of the other leaf shinobi. Looking at the chakra shell around his opponent, he said, So that's why my mother was always able to keep up with my father whenever they fought in spars. She must have used the Uzumaki chakra to control her body movements and make them faster. Kuroda grinned and said, That's right. Naruto frowned and said, The only downside is that it takes extreme amounts of focus to have that chakra manipulate your movements in the right way without harming yourself. Which is why not many Uzumakis could use it in battle, since it's so hard to make your feet move properly without using your muscles. Kuroda's grin turned predatory as he said, Looks like you did your homework about our history, boy, although it seems that what you are doing is more like what that father of yours did. Makes things interesting when your opponent can move around as fast as you. Naruto smirked and said, Oh no, what I'm doing is 5 times better than what Dad did. Right after he said that, a blue shell of chakra surrounded Naruto before 5 clones appeared around him and the 6 blondes disappeared. Kuroda's arm once again moved faster than the others could see, and 5 smoke clouds appeared before Naruto reappeared up against a tree that he was thrown against with a chain made out of the multicolored chakra wrapped around his arm and leading back to Kuroda's free arm. Naruto! Hinata shouted out and was about to rush towards the 2 Uzumakis before Kurenai grabbed her and said, No! Don't! You'll only get in the way. Hinata struggled before Haku said in a calm voice, She's right, Hinata-san. This kind of fight requires speed that you do not have. Right as he said that, mirrors made out of ice began appearing all over the area surrounding the 2 fighters in a large dome that appeared to be completely solid with no gaps. Immediately after they appeared, the temperature inside the dome and around it instantly began dropping to the point where everyone could see their breath. The rest of the leaf shinobi outside along with Kuroda stared in surprise as Haku walked into the back of the mirror in front of him before suddenly reappearing in another mirror right by Naruto, who was shaking his head as he stood up and broke the chains around his arm with a burst of his own chakra. Are you alright, Naruto-san? Haku asked as he stepped out of the mirror. Yeah, he just caught me off guard with those chains of his. I was under the impression that it was something only my mother could do among the Uzumakis of her time. Kuroda smirked from his spot where he hadn't moved from at all and said, You would have been right about that 5 years ago, but I figured out how to do it as well, although it wasn't easy. Your mother was truly a genius when it came to using our bloodline. Good to know, Haku said before he stepped back into his mirror and his image appeared in all of the others as well. Kuroda rose an eyebrow as he looked around and said, Well, that's new. The images all rose their throwing arms over their chest, revealing braces of senbon needle, and said, You seem able to handle multiple opponents quite well, but I wonder if you will be able to handle this as easily. As soon as Haku finished speaking, the dome was filled with senbon needles heading towards the redhead. But to both boys' amazement, Kuroda's chakra shell seemed to expand a little as the redhead moved at speeds that turned his body into one big blur even to Naruto's eyes. Once the barrage of needles was over, Naruto and Haku's eyes widened as they saw Kuroda standing with a grin holding a bunch of senbon needles in his hands, with the rest being held in the air in groups by chakra strings that were connected to various points on his body. Well, now that was interesting. If I was anyone else, I would have been a pincushion for sure. But it seems like a waste to use all those needles and not be able to use them again. Why don't I return them to you? Naruto's eyes widened as all the needles pointed themselves at him before launching themselves towards him at speeds that would give even him trouble to avoid even if he had anywhere to move. Just as the first needles reached him, Haku's hand shot out of the nearest mirror and pulled him through it. As the two boys appeared on the opposite side of the mirror, they heard the needles impacting the inside of the dome. Naruto sighed as he pulled out a needle from his arm that had managed to get him before Haku pulled him through the mirror and said, "Let's not do that again." Haku nodded before they heard, "Hidden Sword Art. Sword Blitz Jutsu." The dome began shuddering as the Kenjutsu user began bombarding the inside with numerous blades of chakra. 10 seconds later the blasts died down and Haku frowned as he concentrated on repairing the damage the attack had done to the mirrors. Naruto frowned as well as Kuroda shouted out to them. "So you put chakra into the mirrors to keep them in existence and repair them. Very clever, but it must be a real drain on your reserves. I can simply wait until you run dry and then finish you off." Naruto glanced over at Haku and said, "How long can you keep those up?" Haku glanced at the mirrors before turning back to Naruto and said, "With that many, about another 10 minutes. Less if he attacks them again. After that, I'll be pretty much useless." Naruto nodded before looking at the mirror and cocked his head in thought. After a minute, his eyes lit up and he said, "You can manipulate those mirrors so that you can use the water in them for jutsu, right?" "Yes, but if I take any of the water out, they will be weaker against his attacks and require more chakra to repair," Haku said, wondering where his partner was going with this. "What if we surrounded him in water and froze him in it?" Haku shook his head and said, "It could be done, but it would take too long to freeze him. By the time he was surrounded, he could simply blast the water away with his chakra before I could lower the temperature enough to fully encase him." Naruto frowned before his eyes lit up again and said, "What if I added my wind-natured chakra into the mix? Would that speed things up? Or could we at least make the dome so cold that it freezes him to death?" Haku's eyes narrowed in thought before he nodded and said, "That could work. We would only get one chance at this though." Naruto nodded and put his hand on the closest mirror and said, "Then we better make this count." Haku nodded again and placed his hand next to Naruto's. The two then closed their eyes in concentration as they began pumping elemental chakra into the dome. As Naruto pushed more wind-natured chakra into the dome, the temperature of the dome itself began dropping dangerously low. The boys only had the chakra running through their arms, moving the cold air away from them to keep them safe from frostbite. On the other side of the dome, Team 8 was shivering as the temperature near the dome kept dropping. "Man, it's freezing out here. What the hell are they doing in there?" Kiba asked as Akamaru jumped into his coat to stay warm. "They're not in the D-dome," Hinata said, stuttering more from the cold than from insecurities, and lifted the hood on her coat as she saw what was happening with her Byakugan. "And Naruto and Haku are on the other side of the dome and are pushing some kind of chakra into it. It's making the temperature around us drop. I can already see frost completely covering the ground inside. It's not just inside. There's some on the ground around the outside as well," Shino said as he pointed at the ring of frost that was steadily growing towards the leaf shinobi. "Everyone back up. I don't know what those two are planning, but I don't want us caught in it," Kurenai said. The three genin all nodded and all four began backing away from the dome. On the inside, Kuroda was trying to use his chakra to insulate his body but was still shivering as well. The entire ground around him was covered in frost and the dome was nearly completely filled with a freezing mist. As the mist continued to fill the dome, Kuroda raised his sword into position and swung it, while calling out, "Hidden Sword Art. Sword Blitz Jutsu." The blades of chakra launched themselves from his sword and slammed into the dome. But to his surprise, the dome repaired itself even faster than before. He then heard his distant relative's voice drift in from outside of the dome. "That's not going to work, Kuroda. It's not just Haku's chakra keeping those mirrors together anymore. Tell you what, if you promise to leave the land of fire and not attack any more leaf shinobi, we'll let you out." On the outside, Haku looked at Naruto in surprise and said, I know he is your relative Naruto-san, but is that wise? Naruto glanced over at him and said, he's family Haku. I have to try. Kuroda frowned before shouting out, you actually expect me to allow the leaf to go unpunished for what they have done? You are either naive or a fool. Naruto sighed before saying, all right, I gave you a chance, but if that's how you want it then I guess we have no choice. Right after Naruto stopped speaking, the mist began closing in on Kuroda and began freezing on his body. As Kuroda began to try and break the ice off, the mirrors began rippling before water shot out and hit him from all angles, freezing over as soon as the water made contact with his body while the mirrors began shrinking. As the mirrors completely disappeared, everyone was able to see Kuroda again, who was standing in the middle of a gem-shaped pillar of ice. Hinata gasped as Kiba said, holy. Under his breath, unable to even finish his sentence as he stared at what had happened to the redhead. Naruto slowly walked towards the ice formation and stared into his relative's eyes before placing his hand on the ice. As Naruto gathered wind chakra into his hand, he said, I'm sorry. The ice and figure in it was instantly turned into powder as Naruto's wind-natured chakra tore through it, leaving no evidence that a human had ever been in that spot. Not even Kuroda's sword or headband survived. Hinata gasped again before all three genin turned their heads from the sight of the powder falling to the ground with their eyes closed. Kurenai turned her eyes away as Naruto closed his own in sadness. Haku stepped over to the blonde and put his hand on his partner's shoulder and asked, are you going to be all right? Naruto nodded before saying, let's head back to the village. Haku nodded and the two jumped into the trees with Team 8 following. That night, the Leaf Shinobi were sitting around a fire as Team 8 and Haku were eating their dinner, while Naruto was staring into the fire with his plate of food remaining untouched. As Hinata glanced over at the blonde, Haku gave her a light nudge. When Hinata turned to the ice user, he gestured over to Naruto and said, why don't we go talk to him, Hinata-san? But I don't know what to say, Hinata said. Haku gave a gentle smile and said, so don't say anything, just show that you're there for him. Before Hinata could say anything to that, Haku stood up and began walking around the fire. Hinata quickly stood up and followed as Haku sat down on one side and Hinata took Naruto's other side with a small blush. Kurenai gave a small smile while Kiba frowned. He was about to stand as well when Shino put his hand onto his shoulder. Kiba shot him a look, but Shino simply shook his head, causing the canine-like boy to simply humph and go back to his meal. Are you all right, Naruto-san? Haku asked as he settled himself. Naruto took in a deep breath before exhaling in a sigh and said, tell me, Haku, were you all right after you killed your father when he killed your mother, and then tried to do the same to you after he discovered your bloodline? Hinata's and the rest of Team 8's eyes widened when they heard this while Haku was silent for a moment. Not at first, Haku admitted before continuing, but eventually the pain lessened with time. And when I met Zabuza-sama it lessened to the point that I could put it behind me. You are lucky, Naruto-san. You already have others who care for you that can help you through this. Yeah, Naruto said as he continued to study the flickering flames of the fire. I just wish he didn't have to die like that. I've lived my entire life without my family. And then the hour that I finally met someone that I shared a blood relation with, I had to kill him for the sake of the village. The world of the shinobi can be a cruel place. But if you have your friends around you, you can survive it, Haku said. Naruto nodded and said, yeah, thanks Haku, you too Hinata, for being here. Haku smiled while Hinata simply nodded. Scene change, Hokage's office. Kurenai, Naruto, and Haku were standing in front of the Hokage as the two jounin finished giving their reports. After they were finished, Sarutobi leaned forward and said, so there was an Uzumaki survivor in the area. I must admit I had thought your mother was the only survivor, Naruto. It is unfortunate that this Kuroda figure felt the way he did about the leaf. We could have used his skills as well as his help in rebuilding your clan. How are you handling it? Naruto looked down for a moment before saying, as well as can be expected, sir. Having Haku around helped. Sarutobi nodded and said, that's good to hear. Very well, if there's nothing else, then you're dismissed. Naruto and Haku nodded, but as they were turning to leave the office, Kurenai said, actually, sir, there is something I need to ask you. When Naruto and Kuroda were talking, he said he knew who Naruto's parents were. He gave the name of Naruto's father, and I was wondering if you could confirm it. Naruto and Sarutobi frowned as Sarutobi looked at Naruto silently asking, and Naruto nodded his head, causing Sarutobi to sigh and begin massaging his forehead. Looking back to Kurenai, he nodded and said, "I'm afraid he was telling the truth." Kurenai's eyes widened and she looked over to Naruto and said, "Then that means that Naruto is dash." "Kurenai," Sarutobi said in a sharp tone, stopping the junior jounin short as Sarutobi continued, "The information about Naruto's full heritage is classified at the highest level." Haku stepped forward and said, "I'm sorry, sir, but why would information about who Naruto's father was be classified so heavily?" "Because Naruto's father made a lot of enemies before he died. More so than his mother and anyone else who fought in the last war combined. If they were to receive word that he had a child that was alive, then they would stop at nothing to see Naruto dead. Could even start the fourth shinobi war." Haku's eyes widened as she glanced at Naruto, who shrugged and said, "You've seen how effective my bloodline is against multiple opponents. My dad took full advantage of that as soon as he figured out a way to get over the tunnel vision that occurs when we use it. Although we don't think the stone or cloud would try anything if they did find out about me due to the fear of what I could do on the battlefield, we still don't want to take that chance." Sarutobi nodded before turning to Kurenai again and said, "Have your genin made the connection?" Kurenai shook her head and said, "Not that I'm aware of. Should I go ahead and tell them?" Sarutobi shook his head and said, "No, there is no need for that. I will inform their parents to make sure they don't talk about it openly." Fortunately, Hayashi was one of his teammates, so he has always known, and Tsum has known, that they were at least related since their scents were so similar. I am sure that Shibi is aware of Naruto's heritage as well. They should be able to run damage control if their children come to them about this. I don't think I have to tell you how important it is that this information does not get out." Kurenai nodded and Sarutobi dismissed them. As Haku and Naruto exited the office, Haku turned to the blonde and said, "You are certainly full of surprises, Naruto-san." Naruto smirked and said, "Haku, you have no idea.